Hey Dead Signal FM viewers, getting ready for bed? Wishing you a calm and cozy night. Before we start, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's get started. The Hollow Between, Part 1, The Coming Home. Mark Thayer had never intended to return to King's Hollow. Not after what happened 23 years ago, but as his car crested the ridge that overlooked the valley where the town nestled, he felt something shift inside him. A tightening in his chest like a winter-frozen lock finally giving way. The town looked smaller than he remembered. The hills that embraced it seemed to have drawn closer, as if they were slowly closing their fist around the collection of buildings below. From this distance, King's Hollow resembled one of those miniature Christmas villages his ex-wife used to collect. Quaint, picturesque, harmless. But Mark knew better. The late October afternoon cast long shadows across the landscape. The sun hung low, bleeding orange and red into the western sky, the colors reflecting across the surface of Mirror Lake, which hugged the eastern edge of town like a crescent moon. The autumn foliage, brilliant oranges, fiery reds, and mournful yellows, spilled down the slopes of the surrounding mountains, creating a deceptively beautiful frame around the valley. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter as he began the descent into town. His knuckles whitened. The rental car's GPS had died somewhere back on Route 16, but he didn't need it. His body remembered the way, each turn, each landmark triggering muscle memories he'd spent decades trying to erase. "You don't have to do this," he told himself aloud, his voice sounding alien in the quiet car. But the letter in his jacket pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile, reminding him that yes, he did have to do this. His father was dead. The funeral was tomorrow. And there was the matter of the house, that damned house on Wicker Hill Road, which now belonged to him. As he followed the winding road down into the valley, Mark's mind drifted back to the phone call 3 days ago. He'd been in his Portland apartment, grading papers for his American literature class, when the call came from Ellie Dufresne, his father's neighbor and apparently the only person who'd bothered to check on the old man during the final years of his life. "He asked me to call you," she'd said after delivering the news of William Thayer's passing. "Heart attack," the doctor said. "Found him in his workshop." "I haven't spoken to my father in over 20 years," Mark had replied, his voice flat. "I know," Ellie had said. "He mentioned that frequently." There had been an accusatory note in her voice that made Mark's jaw clench. "But he left everything to you. The house too. Said you'd know what to do with it." Mark had nearly laughed at that. His father, who had barely acknowledged his existence even before their final, devastating argument, now expected him to deal with the aftermath of his life. It was so perfectly, cruelly fitting. The car hit a pothole, jolting Mark back to the present. He'd reached the town limits. A weathered sign welcomed him to King's Hollow, population 2,187. The paint was peeling, and someone had spray-painted an eye, crude but unsettling, in the corner of the sign. Mark felt a cold trickle of sweat run down his spine. Main Street hadn't changed much. The same storefronts lined the street, though some businesses had changed. Harrington's Hardware was now something called Valley Supply. The old movie theater had been converted into a second-hand shop. Betty's Diner still stood on the corner of Main and Elm, its neon sign flickering weakly in the dying light. People moved along the sidewalks, bundled against the autumn chill. A few glanced at his car as he passed, their eyes lingering a moment too long. Mark kept his gaze forward. He didn't want to recognize anyone, and he certainly didn't want to be recognized. But as he waited at the town's only traffic light, he felt eyes on him. He looked to his right and saw an old man standing outside the barbershop, staring directly at him. Something about the man's gaze, penetrating, knowing, made Mark's skin crawl. The old man lifted his hand in what might have been a wave, or perhaps a warning. Mark quickly looked away as the light turned green. He turned onto Wicker Hill Road, which wound its way up the western slope of the valley. The houses grew farther apart here, separated by stretches of dense woods. The road narrowed, branches from overhanging trees occasionally scraping against the roof of his car. The light dimmed as the forest closed in around him, and then he saw it, 117 Wicker Hill Road, his childhood home, a two-story colonial with peeling white paint and black shutters. It sat back from the road at the end of a gravel driveway, partially obscured by overgrown shrubs and maple trees. The place looked tired, as if it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for something or someone. Mark parked in front of the detached garage and killed the engine. For a long moment he sat in the silence, staring at the house. How many times had he sworn never to come back here? How many nightmares had begun with this very scene? The house seemed to stare back at him, its windows like vacant eyes. Somewhere in the woods behind the property, a crow cawed, the sound sharp and accusing in the stillness. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. It had arrived a week before the phone call. His father's spidery handwriting instantly recognizable on the envelope. He'd almost thrown it away unopened. Now he wished he had. The letter was brief, just a few lines. Mark, when you get this, I'll likely be gone. I know we haven't spoken in a long time, and that's mostly my fault. There are things you need to understand about what happened that summer, about what's in the hollow. I've left everything for you in the workshop. You'll know what to do with it, Dad.
No apology.
No expression of love or regret. Just a cryptic message about the hollow and that summer, as if Mark needed reminding of the events that had torn their family apart and driven him from King's Hollow all those years ago. Mark folded the letter and returned it to his pocket. The sun had dipped below the mountains, casting the valley into premature darkness. The temperature was dropping rapidly. With a deep breath, Mark stepped out of the car. The air smelled of pine and decay, fallen leaves decomposing in the damp earth. He retrieved his suitcase from the trunk and approached the house, gravel crunching under his feet. The key was where it had always been, hidden in a fake rock near the front steps. Some things never changed, he thought bitterly as he unlocked the door. The hinges creaked as the door swung open. Stale air rushed out to meet him, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something chemical and faintly medicinal. Mark fumbled for the light switch. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Power's out, he muttered. Perfect. He stepped into the foyer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. In the dimness, he could make out the familiar layout: living room to the left, kitchen straight ahead, stairs to the right leading to the second floor. A grandfather clock stood silent against the far wall, its pendulum frozen, marking a moment in time that had long since passed. Mark set down his suitcase and reached for his phone to use as a flashlight. As the beam of light cut through the gloom, he caught a glimpse of something on the wall of the living room. A dark stain spreading across the faded wallpaper like a shadow. Heart pounding, he redirected the light. But there was nothing there now, just the same floral pattern he remembered from childhood. A trick of the light, he told himself. Nothing more. He moved through the house, phone held aloft, taking stock of the place that had once been his home. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly forms in the darkness. Dust motes danced in the beam of light. The kitchen was outdated but clean, Ellie's doing, probably. The refrigerator hummed softly, which meant at least some of the electricity was working. Mark found the breaker box in the utility room off the kitchen. One of the switches had been flipped. He reset it, and the house came to life around him. Lights flickering on, the heating system groaning as it awakened from dormancy. The sudden brightness was almost painful after the gloom. Back in the kitchen, Mark noticed a note on the counter, written in an unfamiliar hand. Mr. Thayer stocked the fridge with some basics. Funerals at 11 a.m. at Riverside. I'll come by at 10 to drive you there if you'd like. Ellie. Below that, in a different handwriting, P.S. Don't go into the hollow. The same warning his father had mentioned in his letter. Mark felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He found a bottle of whiskey in one of the cabinets, his father's brand. After a moment's hesitation, he poured himself a finger, then another. The liquor burned going down, but it steadied his nerves. He leaned against the counter, the silence of the house pressing in around him. Tomorrow he would bury his father. Tomorrow he would deal with the house and whatever his father had left for him in the workshop. Tomorrow He would face the town and the memories he'd spent decades running from. But tonight, he just needed to survive the dark. As he carried his suitcase upstairs to his old bedroom, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Not from outside the house, but from within it. Something that had been waiting a very long time for him to come home. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the trees that bordered the property, something moved in the hollow between the hills. Something that had been waiting too. Mark's dreams were a jumble of distorted memories and unfamiliar terrors. He was a child again, running through the woods behind the house, pursued by something he couldn't see but could feel gaining on him with each desperate step. The trees thinned, revealing the hollow, a depression in the earth like a massive footprint pressed into the landscape. And in the center of the hollow stood a circle of stones, ancient and lichen-covered, arranged in a pattern that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. In the dream, his father stood at the edge of the stone circle, beckoning him forward. "Come see what I found, Mark," he was saying, his voice oddly distant. "Come see what lives in the spaces between." Mark tried to turn and run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. The sky above darkened, stars blinking out one by one. From the center of the stone circle, a low moan rose, like the sound of wind through a deep cavern. Then his father was gone, and in his place stood a figure shrouded in shadow, its form constantly shifting. Now tall and gaunt, now squat and bulbous, now something else entirely, something that hurt to look at directly. Mark woke with a gasp, sheets twisted around his legs, sweat-soaked despite the chill in the room. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The unfamiliar shapes of furniture in the darkness, the odd angle of moonlight through the window. Then reality came crashing back. His father's house, King's Hollow, the funeral tomorrow. He fumbled for his phone on the nightstand.
3:17 Uhr nachts.
The witching hour, his mother used to call it, that time of night when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Mark shook his head, trying to dislodge the thought. He wasn't a superstitious man. He was a college professor, a rationalist. He didn't believe in veils between worlds or things that went bump in the night. But as he lay there in the dark, listening to the old house settle around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about tonight, about this return to King's Hollow. Something in the air, perhaps. A tension like the moment before a lightning strike. Mark sat up, resigned to being awake. He reached for the lamp on the nightstand, but before his fingers found the switch, he froze. There was a sound coming from downstairs, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood.
Top, top, top.
He held his breath, listening. The sound came again, slightly louder now.
Top, top, top.
It was coming from the direction of his father's workshop, which occupied most of the first floor of the detached garage. Mark swung his legs over the edge of the bed, heart hammering in his chest. Could be anything, he reasoned. A branch against a window, a pipe expanding in the cold. Some small animal seeking shelter. But even as he thought this, he knew it was none of those things. The tapping had a deliberate quality to it, an intelligence behind it.
Top, top, top.
Mark stood, found his jeans on the floor, and pulled them on. He grabbed his phone and the small flashlight he kept in his suitcase, a habit from years of travel. Then, moving as quietly as possible, he made his way downstairs. The house was dark except for the green glow of digital clocks from the kitchen appliances. Mark paused at the back door, listening. The tapping had stopped. He waited, counting his heartbeats. 10, 20, 30, nothing. Maybe he'd imagined it after all. Some remnant of his dream crossing over into wakefulness. He was about to turn back when it started again. Louder, more insistent.
Top, top, top.
Without giving himself time to reconsider, Mark unlocked the back door and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and sharp in his lungs. The moon hung low over the treetops, casting long shadows across the yard. The workshop stood 20 yards away, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Mark approached cautiously, flashlight beams sweeping the ground ahead of him. The gravel path was slick with dew, and his shoes made soft crunching sounds with each step. The tapping had stopped again, but now there was a new sound. A low humming noise, like an electrical transformer or a distant diesel engine. The workshop door was locked, but the key hung on a nail just above the frame. Another unchanged habit of his father's. Mark retrieved it with trembling fingers and unlocked the door. The humming grew louder as he pushed the door open. The workshop was exactly as he remembered it. A large, open space filled with workbenches, tools, and his father's various projects. William Thayer had been an engineer by trade, but his true passion had been what he called theoretical mechanics, devices and contraptions of his own design, often with no practical purpose beyond testing some obscure principle of physics or mathematics. Mark switched on the overhead lights. The workshop sprang into sharp relief, and at the center of it all stood a device unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It resembled a pendulum clock, but vastly more complex. A series of gears and levers surrounded a central column, which extended from floor to ceiling. At various points along the column, arms projected outward, each ending in what looked like a tuning fork or small satellite dish. The entire apparatus was connected to a generator, which was the source of the humming sound. But what drew Mark's attention was the center of the device, where a glass sphere about the size of a basketball hung, suspended in a metal cradle. Within the sphere, something moved. A dark fluid that seemed to swirl and eddy of its own accord, defying gravity, forming shapes that hurt his eyes to follow. On the workbench next to the device lay his father's journal, a thick, leather-bound book with yellowed pages covered in his father's small, precise handwriting. And beside the journal was an envelope with Mark's name on it. Mark approached slowly, drawn to the sphere despite an instinctive revulsion. The dark fluid inside seemed to respond to his presence, swirling faster, pressing against the glass as if trying to get closer to him. He tore his gaze away and picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in haste or under duress. Mark, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found the resonator. What you see before you is the culmination of 23 years of work. A device capable of bridging the gap between our world and the hollow spaces that exist between dimensions. I know you blame me for what happened to Danny. I've blamed myself every day since. But I need you to understand what took him wasn't my fault. It was already here in King's Hollow long before we came. It's been here since before the town was founded, sleeping in the hollow between the hills. I built the resonator to find him, Mark, to bring him back, and I've succeeded partially. I've made contact, but the connection is unstable. The entity that inhabits the hollow is not what I expected. It showed me things, terrible things, the past, the future, the spaces between moments where something vast and ancient watches us. I've grown too weak to complete the work. My heart isn't what it used to be. That's why I need you. You're the only one who can finish what I started. You're the only one who can bring Danny back. The journal contains everything you need to know. But be careful. The hollow watches. It remembers. And it's hungry. There isn't much time. Once you read this, it will know you're here. It will come for you like it came for me. Like it came for Danny. I'm sorry, son. For everything. Dad. Mark read the letter twice, his hands shaking so badly that the paper rattled. The humming from the device, the resonator, had grown louder, and the dark fluid in the sphere was now pulsing rhythmically, like a heart beating. Danny, his little brother. The name reopened a wound that had never fully healed. 23 years ago, Danny had disappeared in the woods behind their house, the woods that bordered the hollow. They'd searched for days, the entire town turning out to comb the forest, but no trace of the 7-year-old boy had ever been found. The official report had ruled it a tragic accident, a child wandering too far from home, likely falling into one of the many abandoned mine shafts that dotted the hills around King's Hollow. But Mark had never believed that. He'd been 15 at the time, old enough to know that his father's increasingly bizarre behavior in the months leading up to Danny's disappearance had something to do with what had happened. And now, this letter seemed to confirm his worst suspicions. His father had been experimenting with something dangerous, something related to the hollow, and somehow Danny had paid the price. Mark looked up from the letter to find that the dark fluid in the sphere had formed a shape. A face, pressing against the glass, features distorted but recognizable. A child's face. Danny's face. Mark stumbled backward, knocking over a stool. The face in the sphere seemed to track his movement, its expression one of pleading, of pain. Then it dissolved, the fluid returning to its chaotic swirling. The humming from the resonator suddenly changed pitch, becoming a high-pitched whine that made Mark's teeth ache. The lights in the workshop flickered, and from somewhere deep in the woods behind the house came a sound. A long, low moan, like the one from his dream. Mark grabbed the journal and the letter, backing toward the door. The resonator was vibrating now, the glass sphere rattling in its cradle. The dark fluid inside was becoming agitated, slamming against the sides of the sphere with increasing force. As Mark reached the door, the sphere shattered. The dark fluid hung in the air for a moment, defying gravity, still maintaining a rough spherical shape. Then it collapsed, splashing onto the floor, but not like a normal liquid. It moved with purpose, flowing across the concrete toward Mark, faster than seemed possible. Mark didn't wait to see more. He bolted from the workshop, slamming the door behind him. The night air hit him like a slap, cold and sharp after the heated interior of the workshop. He sprinted across the yard toward the house, the journal and letter clutched to his chest. Behind him, the workshop lights went out. The humming stopped, and in the sudden silence, Mark heard a sound that turned his blood to ice. The back door of the workshop opening, followed by the soft scrape of something dragging itself across the gravel path. Mark reached the back door of the house, fumbling with the handle in his panic. It swung open, and he practically fell inside, slamming the door shut and turning the deadbolt. For several heartbeats, he stood there, back pressed against the door, listening. Nothing. Just the sound of his own ragged breathing and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, which he distinctly remembered had not been running earlier. He moved cautiously through the kitchen to the living room, where he could see the workshop through the front window. It sat dark and still in the moonlight, no sign of movement or disturbance. Had he imagined it all? The face in the sphere, the fluid moving with apparent intelligence. Mark looked down at the journal in his hands, concrete proof that something extraordinary was happening. He moved to the couch, switched on a lamp, and opened the journal to the first page. August 4th, 2001. I found something in the hollow, something impossible. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 4 times, marking the hour. Dawn was still a few hours away. Mark settled deeper into the couch, the journal open on his lap, and began to read. Unaware that outside, something was watching the house from the edge of the woods, something that had been waiting 23 years for his return. And in the hollow between the hills, something else stirred. Something ancient and patient and very, very hungry. 3. The first hints of dawn were breaking over the eastern ridge when Mark finally closed his father's journal. His eyes burned from hours of reading, and his mind reeled with what he'd discovered. According to the journal, William Thayer had first stumbled upon the stone circle in the hollow while surveying the property shortly after purchasing the house in 2001. At first, he'd dismissed it as a curiosity, probably Native American in origin, or perhaps the work of early settlers. But then he'd noticed something odd. The circle seemed to change. Not dramatically, but subtly, stones shifting position overnight, the diameter of the circle expanding or contracting by inches. Intrigued, William had begun spending more time in the hollow, setting up cameras and measurement devices. And that's when the dreams had started, vivid, disorienting dreams of vast, impossible spaces and beings that existed outside the boundaries of conventional physics. In the dreams, these entities communicated with him, showing him glimpses of other worlds, other realities layered atop our own, separated by what William called the hollow spaces. Mark's father had become convinced that the stone circle was a doorway of sorts, a thin spot between dimensions, and he'd set about trying to establish more reliable communication with whatever existed on the other side. That's when he'd begun work on the first version of the resonator. The journal detailed William's growing obsession with the hollow and the entities he claimed to be contacting through his dreams. He'd stopped going to work, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. And then, in entries dated just weeks before Danny's disappearance, William had written about a breakthrough. The entities have shown me how to improve the resonator. They want to come through to visit our world. They've shown me what they can offer in exchange. Knowledge beyond human understanding, glimpses of technologies that won't be discovered for centuries. But they need a conduit, a guide, someone pure. The next few entries were missing, pages torn from the journal. Then, the first entry after Danny's disappearance. God forgive me, I didn't understand what they wanted. I didn't know what would happen. I've destroyed the resonator, but it's too late. They have him, my boy, my Danny. The rest of the journal, spanning more than 2 decades, documented William's desperate attempts to rebuild the resonator, to find a way to bring Danny back. He'd consulted physicists, occultists, anyone who might help him understand what had happened and how to reverse it. He traveled to places with similar legends of thin spots between worlds, Sedona, Arizona, Glastonbury Tor in England, the Devil's Triangle in the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts. And gradually, he developed a theory. The entities in the hollow weren't from another dimension, exactly. They existed in the spaces between dimensions, the hollow places where reality itself was thin. They couldn't fully manifest in our world, but they could reach through, influence minds, and sometimes, if given an anchor or a guide, they could pull things or people back with them. William had believed that Danny wasn't dead, but trapped in this in-between place. And the new resonator was designed not just to communicate with the entities, but to create a stable passage through which Danny could be retrieved. The final entries in the journal grew increasingly paranoid, with William writing about feeling watched, about noises in the night, about the dark fluid that had begun to appear in the glass sphere of the resonator, a substance he called hollow matter, which seemed to be a physical manifestation of the space between dimensions. The very last entry, dated just 3 days before his death, was particularly disturbing. It's happening again. The dreams, the voices. But this time they're not just talking to me. They're talking about me, to someone else. I think I know who. Mark. They know he's coming. They've been waiting for him. All these years, they've been waiting for both my sons. I've made a terrible mistake. Mark closed the journal, his hands trembling. The sun was now fully above the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room. In the light of day, the horrors described in the journal seemed almost absurd. The ravings of a guilt-ridden, possibly mentally ill man who had never recovered from the loss of his youngest son. And yet, Mark had seen the resonator. He had seen the dark fluid moving with apparent intelligence. He had heard the sounds from the woods. His phone buzzed, making him jump. A text from Ellie Dufresne. We'll pick you up at 10 for the funeral. Sorry about your father. He was a good man despite everything. Mark checked the time.
7:30 Uhr morgens.
He had a little over 2 hours to shower, dress, and somehow process everything he'd learned. But first, he needed coffee and to check on the workshop in the daylight. In the kitchen, he found an ancient coffee maker and a sealed bag of beans in the freezer. While the coffee brewed, he moved to the window that overlooked the backyard and the workshop beyond. The workshop looked normal in the morning light. A simple wooden structure with a metal roof, weathered by time and elements. No sign of the chaos from the night before. No dark fluid seeping under the door. No evidence of whatever it was he thought he'd heard dragging itself across the gravel. Mark's rational mind began to assert itself. He'd been exhausted last night, stressed about returning to King's Hollow and facing his father's death. He'd read the letter with its bizarre claims, seen the strange device, and his imagination had done the rest. The broken sphere, the moving fluid, it was possible he'd hallucinated it all, a manifestation of grief and old trauma. But then, what about the journal? The detailed records of William's 23-year obsession couldn't be so easily dismissed. The coffee maker beeped. Mark poured himself a cup and decided he needed to see the workshop again, to confirm with his own eyes what was real and what wasn't. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear. Dew sparkled on the grass, and birds called from the surrounding trees. Mark approached the workshop cautiously, coffee mug in one hand, workshop key in the other. The door was locked, just as it should be. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Mark took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The workshop was exactly as he remembered it from his childhood: workbenches, tools, half-finished projects. But the resonator, the device that had dominated the center of the room last night, was gone. In its place was an empty space, the concrete floor stained with a dark, oily substance. Mark stepped inside, not quite believing what he was seeing. He set his coffee down on a workbench and moved to the center of the room, kneeling to examine the stain. It was dry to the touch, slightly tacky, like old paint. It formed a perfect circle on the floor, about 6 feet in diameter. He stood, turning slowly, taking in the rest of the workshop. Everything else seemed normal. His father's tools hanging neatly on pegboards, shelves of books and journals, a small refrigerator in the corner. But the resonator was undeniably gone, along with any evidence of the dark fluid that had escaped from the sphere. Mark's eyes fell on the workbench where he'd found the journal and the letter last night. Both were gone. He reached instinctively for his pocket, expecting to find the letter there, but it was empty. He distinctly remembered bringing both the journal and the letter back to the house, reading through the journal on the couch. A chill ran down his spine. He hurried back to the house, heart pounding. In the living room, the couch was empty. No journal, no letter. On the coffee table, where he was certain he hadn't left it, was a framed photograph he didn't recognize. A black and white image of the stone circle in the hollow, dated 1887. Written in faded script at the bottom of the photo were the words, "The Watcher's Circle." Mark picked up the photograph, studying it. The stone circle looked exactly as he remembered it from his childhood. 7 large stones arranged in a circle, with a smaller stone at the center. But in this image, there was something else. A dark figure standing at the edge of the circle, blurred as if in motion. The figure was tall and thin, its proportions subtly wrong in a way that made Mark's eyes hurt to look at directly. He set the photograph down, his hand shaking. This wasn't possible. Someone was playing an elaborate joke on him, moving things around, planting items to frighten him. But who and why? The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 9 times. Mark started, nearly knocking over his coffee. The clock was running again, though he hadn't wound it. Another impossibility in a growing list. He needed to get out of the house to clear his head. The funeral was in 2 hours. He would shower, dress, attend the service, and then he would figure out what was happening. Whether his father had truly discovered something extraordinary in the hollow, or whether this was all some elaborate delusion, possibly shared between father and son. As he headed upstairs to shower, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious, something important. A detail from the journal, perhaps, or a clue in the letter. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe what he was missing was the truth about what had really happened to Danny all those years ago. A truth that might explain why, after 23 years of silence, his father had summoned him back to King's Hollow. A truth that might be waiting for him in the hollow between the hills. Part 2. The Hollow. For the funeral was sparsely attended. William Thayer, it seemed, had become something of a recluse in his later years, his odd behavior and obsession with the hollow having driven away most friends and acquaintances. Besides Mark, there were only a handful of people in attendance. Mostly elderly neighbors who had known William for decades, plus Ellie Dufresne, who hovered protectively near Mark throughout the service. Ellie was younger than Mark had expected, early 50s, with graying blonde hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd been a professor of folklore and mythology at the community college in the next town over, she explained during the drive to the cemetery, but had retired early to care for her mother, who had suffered from dementia before passing away 2 years ago. "Your father was kind to me during that time," she said as they walked behind the hearse. "Brought me meals, checked in on me. Most people in town thought he was... Well, they thought the grief had broken something in him after Danny disappeared. But I knew better. William was sane. More than sane. He saw things the rest of us miss." Mark glanced at her sharply. "What do you mean by that?" Ellie gave him a measured look. "Has he told you about the hollow yet? In his letters, I mean. Or did he leave something for you in the workshop?" Mark's step faltered. "You knew about that?" I helped him toward the end, when his hands got too shaky to work the more delicate components of the resonator. She said it matter-of-factly, as if they were discussing something as mundane as a birdhouse or a model ship. He wanted so badly to finish it before his time came. I'm not sure he did. Mark stopped walking altogether, forcing Ellie to stop as well. The small funeral procession continued ahead of them, no one noticing their absence. Ms. Dufresne. Ellie, please. Ellie, I found my father's journal last night, and the resonator, but this morning both were gone, along with a letter he left for me. Mark searched her face for a reaction. Any hint that she knew more than she was letting on. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Ellie's expression darkened. It's starting already then, sooner than I expected. What's starting? She glanced toward the funeral procession, which had reached the gravesite about 50 yards ahead. Not here. After the service, come to my house. It's the blue one just down the road from yours. I'll tell you everything I know. But Mark... She gripped his arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. Be careful until then. The Hollow is aware of you now. It's been waiting for you, since long before you were born. With that cryptic warning, she released his arm and hurried to catch up with the others, leaving Mark standing alone on the path, more confused than ever. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Mark stood at the graveside, listening to the minister, who had clearly never met William Thayer, deliver a generic eulogy about a good man returned to God's embrace. Mark thought about his complicated relationship with his father, about the decades of silence between them, about the strange, desperate letter and the even stranger journal. Had his father truly discovered something extraordinary in the Hollow? Or had he simply descended into madness after losing his youngest son? And what of Mark's own experiences last night? The resonator, the dark fluid, the face he thought he'd seen, Danny's face, pressing against the glass? As the minister finished speaking and the small gathering began to disperse, Mark noticed someone standing at a distance from the group. A thin, elderly man in a worn gray suit, leaning on a cane. It took Mark a moment to recognize him as the old man he'd seen outside the barbershop yesterday, the one who had stared at him with such unsettling intensity. The old man met Mark's gaze and nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then he turned and walked away, his cane leaving small, precise divots in the soft earth of the cemetery. Who was that? Mark asked Ellie as she approached him. Harold Winters. He used to work with your father years ago. Before. She hesitated. Before everything happened with Danny. Ellie drove Mark back to the house in silence, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. As they pulled into the driveway, she turned to him. 1 hour. My place. The blue house with the white trim, just down the road. She reached into her purse and removed a small object wrapped in a handkerchief, pressing it into Mark's palm. Keep this with you until then. Don't let it out of your sight. Through the handkerchief, Mark could feel something hard and angular. A small stone, perhaps, or a piece of metal. What is it? He asked. Protection, she said simply, then leaned across him to open his door, a clear dismissal. Back inside the house, Mark unwrapped the object Ellie had given him. It was a stone no larger than a golf ball, but unusually heavy for its size. Its surface was covered in tiny, precise engravings, symbols he didn't recognize, curves and angles that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. Mark set the stone on the kitchen counter and went upstairs to change out of his funeral clothes. As he loosened his tie, his mind returned to the journal, to the resonator, to all the impossibilities he'd experienced since arriving in King's Hollow. He needed answers, real answers, not more mysteries. And it seemed Ellie Dufresne might be the one person who could provide them. An hour later, Mark stood on Ellie's porch, the engraved stone heavy in his pocket. Her house was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes beneath the windows and wind chimes hanging from the eaves. It looked perfectly normal, the home of a retired professor, not someone who helped build devices to communicate with interdimensional entities. Ellie answered his knock almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting just inside the door. She ushered him in and led him to a small study off the main hallway, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers and open books. "You have questions," she said, gesturing for him to sit in one of two armchairs positioned near a fireplace. "And I have some answers, though perhaps not all the ones you're looking for." Mark remained standing. "I want to know what's happening. My father's journal, the resonator, the things I saw last night, they were real, weren't they? Not hallucinations, not grief-induced delusions." "Yes," Ellie said simply. "They were real. The hollow is real. The entities your father communicated with, they're real too, though not in the way we understand reality." She moved to her desk and picked up a book, an ancient-looking tome bound in faded leather. "This is a history of King's Hollow, written in 1902 by a local physician named Jeremiah Wicker, yes, as in Wicker Hill Road. He was one of the founding families." She opened the book to a marked page and handed it to Mark. There, in yellowed, brittle pages, was a detailed account of the hollow and the stone circle within it. According to Wicker, the indigenous people of the region had avoided the area for centuries, believing it to be a place where the fabric between worlds was thin, where those who watch from outside could reach through. The first European settlers had discovered the stone circle in 1768 and, ignoring the warnings of their Native American guides, had built their settlement, what would eventually become King's Hollow, in the valley below. Strange occurrences had plagued the town ever since. Unexplained disappearances, unusual phenomena, periods of collective madness during which the townspeople reported seeing impossible things in the sky above the hollow. "Every 23 years, Ellie said, taking the book back from Mark. "The phenomena intensify. Wicker didn't know why, but he documented the pattern. 1861, 1884, 1907, 1930, 1953, 1976, 1999, 2022, Mark finished for her, a chill running down his spine. "That's now, this year." Ellie nodded grimly. "Yes, and the last time in 1999 was when your family moved to King's Hollow, when your father first discovered the stone circle. And when Danny disappeared," Mark added quietly. Ellie's expression softened. "Yes, I'm sorry, Mark. I know how painful that must be for you." Mark sank into the armchair, his legs suddenly weak. "So what my father wrote in his journal about entities in the hollow, about them taking Danny, that was all true?" "I believe so." Ellie sat in the other chair, facing Mark. "Your father wasn't the first to try to communicate with what lives in the hollow. Throughout the town's history, there have been others, sensitive individuals who felt drawn to the stone circle, who reported dreams and visions similar to what William described. But your father was the first to attempt a systematic, scientific approach to establishing contact." "And the resonator?" Mark asked. "It actually worked?" "To a degree." Ellie looked troubled. In recent months, William had begun to receive responses, concrete physical manifestations, not just dreams or visions. "The dark fluid you saw, that was new. It started appearing in the sphere about 3 weeks ago. But this morning, everything was gone. The resonator, the journal, even the letter my father left for me." Ellie nodded, unsurprised. The entities are capable of manipulating our reality in small ways, especially as we get closer to the 23-year mark. Objects disappear or appear where they shouldn't be. Time behaves oddly. You may have noticed the grandfather clock in your father's house. Mark thought of the clock he'd distinctly remembered being stopped, only to hear it chiming the hours later. "Yes, that clock hasn't worked in decades. William never wound it. Yet in the last few weeks it would sometimes start running on its own, usually at night, and it never showed the correct time." A thought occurred to Mark. "The stone you gave me, what is it?" Ellie smiled slightly. "A form of protection. Certain materials, certain symbols seem to interfere with the entity's ability to influence our reality. Your father discovered this by accident. The stone is a piece of the meteorite that created the hollow thousands of years ago." "A meteorite?" Mark's academic interest was piqued despite his unease. "You mean the hollow is a crater?" "Of sorts, but not a normal one. Whatever struck the Earth here wasn't just a rock from space. It was something else, something that carried the entities with it, or perhaps they were already here, and the impact simply created a way for them to reach through more easily. She shrugged. The exact mechanics are beyond my understanding. What matters is that the meteorite fragments seem to provide a measure of protection against their influence. Mark reached into his pocket, feeling the comforting weight of the stone. So what happens now? What do the entities want? And what do they have to do with me? Ellie's expression grew grave. That's where my knowledge ends and my fears begin. William believed they wanted to come through fully into our world. Not just reach through the thin places, but manifest completely. He thought they needed a guide, someone who could bridge the gap between their realm and ours. He thought they wanted Danny for that purpose. But Danny was just a child, Mark protested. Children are more adaptable, Ellie said carefully, more open to possibilities adults would reject. And there was something else, something William discovered later, after years of research. She hesitated. There's a bloodline connection. Certain families in King's Hollow have a stronger connection to the Hollow than others. The Wickers were one, and the Thayers, your mother's family, were another. Mark stared at her. My mother wasn't from King's Hollow. No, but her ancestors were. She was a Wicker on her mother's side. A direct descendant of Jeremiah Wicker, in fact. Your father only discovered this after Danny disappeared. He found birth records, family trees. The Thayers and the Wickers intermarried several times throughout the town's history. So what are you saying? That Danny and I were, what? Genetically predisposed to be influenced by these entities. Not just influenced, Ellie said soberly. Chosen. William believed that the entities had been watching your family for generations, waiting for the right moment, the right vessels. Danny was meant to be their way in. And you? She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. What about me? Mark demanded. William thought you might be the key to bringing Danny back. That's why he summoned you here now. He believed that with the resonator, with the blood connection between you and Danny, and with the 23-year cycle reaching its peak, there might be a chance to open a stable doorway between our world and theirs. To bring Danny home. Mark stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is insane. All of it. Interdimensional entities, ancient meteorites, family bloodlines. It sounds like the plot of a bad horror novel. I understand your skepticism, Ellie said calmly. I felt the same when William first shared his discoveries with me. But I've seen things, Mark. Things that can't be explained by conventional science. And I've read the accounts in Wicker's book. Accounts that match what's happening now with eerie precision. Mark stopped pacing, fixing Ellie with a hard stare. Let's say I believe you. Let's say all of this is real. What am I supposed to do about it? The resonator is gone. My father's journal is gone. I have no idea how to proceed, even if I wanted to. The resonator isn't gone, Ellie said quietly. It's been moved. To the hollow. To the stone circle. I saw it there early this morning, before I came to pick you up for the funeral. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Moved? By whom? Not whom. What? Ellie stood, moving to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to wane, shadows lengthening across her garden. I said what the entities showed might not be Danny, but something of Danny likely still exists within the hollow. Whether it's something that can be brought back, something that would even want to be brought back after 23 years in that place. He shook his head. I don't know. What Harold is trying to say, Ellie interjected, is that we have to focus on the immediate threat. The entities are trying to come through tonight. If they succeed, what happened to Danny will happen to countless others. We have to stop them first. Then, maybe, we can find a way to help Danny. Mark nodded slowly, processing this. He looked at the stone circle again, at the resonator with its swirling sphere of dark fluid. Was that really what his father had built? Or had it been subtly altered, corrupted by the entities to serve their own purposes? We're running out of time, Harold said, checking his watch. The peak will be at midnight, but the boundary is already thinning. We need to position the disruptors before the entities realize what we're doing. As if in response to his words, A low moan rose from the center of the stone circle. The same sound Mark had heard in his dream, like wind through a deep cavern. The dark fluid in the sphere began to pulse rhythmically, its swirling motion becoming more agitated. "They know we're here," Ellie said, her voice tense. "They know what we're planning." Harold handed out the remaining disruptors. "Remember, equidistant around the circle. Don't step inside until all the disruptors are in place. And Mark." He fixed Mark with an intense stare. "No matter what you see or hear, no matter what they show you, remember why we're here. Remember what's at stake." With that, they separated, moving to their designated positions around the stone circle. The hollow had grown darker, the phosphorescence of the lichen now the primary source of light. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. Mark could hear his own heartbeat, rapid and shallow, as he approached the southern edge of the circle. As he neared his position, Mark noticed something strange about the stone closest to him. There appeared to be writing on it, crude, ancient-looking symbols carved into the lichen-covered surface. He leaned in for a closer look, careful not to cross the invisible boundary of the circle. The symbols seemed to shift before his eyes, reorganizing themselves into letters, into words he could understand. "Mark Thayer, come home." He recoiled, nearly dropping the disruptor. The words faded back into meaningless symbols, then reformed again. "Daniel waits. Don't look at the stones directly," Harold called from across the circle, his voice seeming to come from much farther away than the few dozen yards that separated them. "They'll show you what they want you to see, not what's really there." Mark tore his gaze away from the stone, focusing instead on the ground where he needed to place the disruptor. He knelt, setting the device down precisely at the southern point of the circle. As soon as it touched the ground, it began to emit a soft, pulsing hum, its lights blinking in sequence. Across the circle, he could see Harold and Ellie doing the same with their disruptors. The three devices seemed to communicate with each other, their lights synchronizing, their humming converging into a single, resonant tone that set Mark's teeth on edge. The resonator at the center of the circle responded, its own humming changing pitch, becoming discordant. The dark fluid in the sphere splashed against the glass, as if trying to escape. "It's working," Harold called, his voice strained. "The disruptors are counteracting the resonator's frequency. But we need the pendant, Mark. We need you to place it on the altar stone." Mark's hand went to the pendant around his neck. The simple act of removing it filled him with dread. Even through his shirt, he could feel it vibrating, as if in response to the energies being unleashed around the stone circle. "Mark!" Ellie's voice came from his right, urgent and fearful. "We need to hurry. Look at the sphere." Mark looked at the glass sphere at the center of the resonator. The dark fluid inside was no longer simply swirling. It was taking shape, forming a face pressed against the inside of the glass. Danny's face, just as he'd seen in the workshop, but clearer now, more defined. The face of a boy frozen at age 7, his expression a mixture of terror and pleading. "Mark, help me." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his mind. "They've kept me here. So long. So dark." "Don't listen," Harold called sharply. "It's not Danny. It's them, using your memories against you." Mark hesitated, torn between doubt and desperate hope. The face in the sphere shifted, becoming more solid, more real. Danny's eyes, his mother's eyes, Mark's own eyes, stared out at him, filled with tears. "Big brother, you came back for me? Like you promised." Had he promised that? Mark couldn't remember. The days after Danny's disappearance were a blur of search parties, police interviews, his parents' grief turning to recrimination, and then the decision to leave King's Hollow to try to start over somewhere else. "Mark!" Ellie's voice cut through his thoughts.
Cependant.
Now, the glass sphere was beginning to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its surface like a spiderweb. The dark fluid pressed against the weakening barrier, Danny's face still visible within it, his lips forming words Mark couldn't quite make out. With shaking hands, Mark removed the pendant from around his neck. Immediately, he felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he'd removed a protective shield. The air around him seemed to thicken further, pressure building in his ears, in his head. "You have to enter the circle," Harold instructed, his voice strained. "Place the pendant on the altar stone at the center." Quickly, Mark took a deep breath and stepped over the invisible boundary into the stone circle. The atmosphere changed instantly. The air became charged with static electricity, making the hair on his arms stand on end. Sounds became muffled, as if he were underwater. His movements felt sluggish, each step requiring concentration and effort. The altar stone was just ahead, a flat, rectangular slab positioned directly in front of the resonator. As Mark approached, the dark fluid in the sphere grew more agitated, slamming against the cracking glass with increasing force. Danny's face dissolved, reforming into something else. Something with too many eyes, too many angles, its features constantly shifting in ways that hurt to look at directly. "Mark!" The voice was no longer Danny's, but something older, deeper, a sound like stones grinding together. "We have waited so long. For you." Mark pressed forward, fighting against the increasing resistance of the air itself. The pendant in his hand grew hot, almost painful to hold. Just a few more steps to the altar stone. Behind him, outside the circle, he could hear Harold and Ellie calling to him, their voices distant and distorted. The disruptor's hum had risen to a painful whine, competing with the resonator's deeper, more resonant tone. 2 steps from the altar stone, Mark felt something grab his ankle. Not a physical hand, but a force, an immaterial grip that held him in place. He looked down and saw the ground beneath him had changed, become semi-transparent. Through it, he could see something, a vast space filled with writhing shapes, with geometries that made no sense, with entities that seemed to be made of darkness itself. And directly below him, reaching up through the thinning barrier between worlds, was a figure that might once have been human. It wore the tattered remains of a child's clothing, a red t-shirt, now gray with age and filth, and blue jeans torn at the knees. Its face was elongated, eyes too large, fingers too numerous and too long. But there was just enough of Danny left in its features for Mark to recognize his brother. "You left me here." The thing that had been Danny said, its voice a distorted echo of the 7-year-old boy's. "You let them take me. Now I'm one of them, Mark. And soon you will be too." Mark recoiled in horror, nearly dropping the pendant. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be Danny. His brother was dead, had to be dead after 23 years in that place. "It's showing you what it thinks will break you," Harold shouted, his voice barely audible over the competing frequencies of the disruptors and the resonator. "Focus, Mark."
Cependant.
With supreme effort, Mark tore his gaze away from the thing reaching for him through the thinning barrier. He lunged forward, closing the distance to the altar stone, and slammed the pendant down onto its flat surface. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The pendant flared with blinding light, its engravings glowing like molten metal. The disruptors responded in kind, their humming rising to a frequency that made Mark's vision blur. The resonator seemed to fight back, its deeper tone intensifying, the dark fluid in the sphere hammering against the cracking glass with renewed fury. Then the glass shattered. The dark fluid hung in the air for a moment, maintaining its spherical shape through some impossible physics. Then it collapsed, not downward with gravity, but inward, as if being sucked into a point in the center of itself. In seconds, it had vanished completely. A sudden silence fell over the hollow. The disruptors stopped humming. The pendant's glow faded. Even the night sounds of the forest, insects, distant owls, had gone quiet. Mark stood at the center of the stone circle, breathing hard, waiting for something. Some indication that they had succeeded, that the hollow had been sealed. Then the ground beneath him gave way. It wasn't a physical collapse. The earth didn't open up and swallow him. Rather, reality itself seemed to thin, to become permeable. Mark felt himself sinking, not down but through, passing from one state of being into another. From outside the circle, he heard Ellie scream his name. He saw Harold rushing forward, Cain forgotten, moving with surprising speed for his age. But they were too late. Mark was falling, tumbling through a space that wasn't space, through darkness that wasn't just the absence of light but something alive, something aware. Around him, shapes moved, vast, incomprehensible things that seemed to be composed of mathematics and madness in equal measure. And then, abruptly, he stopped falling. He was standing on solid ground again, or what passed for ground in this place. A featureless plain stretched in all directions, neither light nor dark, but somehow both simultaneously. Above him, though above seemed like an arbitrary concept here, shapes moved against a backdrop of what might have been stars, but which pulsed and shifted in patterns that made his head ache to follow. "We have waited for you, Mark Thayer." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of thousands speaking in perfect unison. Mark turned slowly, trying to locate the source. Behind him stood a figure that resembled his father, or rather, a crude approximation of his father, as if someone had studied William Thayer but had never quite understood the specifics of human anatomy. The proportions were slightly wrong, the movements too fluid in some places, too jerky in others. "You're not my father," Mark said, his voice sounding flat and lifeless in the strange atmosphere of this place. "No," the figure agreed. "We wear this shape to make communication easier. We have worn many shapes over the centuries. We spoke to your ancestors in the guise of gods, of angels, of demons. We have been worshipped and feared in equal measure." The figure that wasn't William Thayer moved closer, its movements too smooth, like liquid flowing in the shape of a man. "Your father sought us out. He built a bridge between your world and ours. He gave us his youngest son as a token of good faith." "That's a lie," Mark spat. "My father would never willingly sacrifice Danny." "Willingly?" The figure cocked its head at an impossible angle. Perhaps not consciously, but subconsciously he understood the requirements. A bridge needs an anchor on both sides. Daniel was our anchor, and you, Mark Thayer, will be our vessel. The figure began to change, its features melting and reforming. Now it looked like Danny, not the corrupted version Mark had glimpsed through the thinning barrier, but Danny as he should have been if allowed to grow up. A young man of 30, with familiar eyes and a smile that broke Mark's heart. "It doesn't have to be a horror story, brother," the Danny thing said, its voice a perfect simulation of what Danny might have sounded like as an adult. "We're not monsters, not as you understand the term. We're simply different. We want to experience your world, to share ours with you, to merge the hollow spaces with your reality." Mark backed away, his mind racing. Was he really in another dimension, another reality? Or was this all happening in his mind, a hallucination induced by the energies released when the resonator failed? "If you're not monsters," he challenged, "then why the abductions? Why take Danny? Why terrorize my father for 23 years? The Danny figure looked genuinely puzzled. "Terror? No, that was not our intent. Your father sought knowledge, and we provided it. We showed him wonders beyond human comprehension. That his mind could not fully process what we offered is hardly our fault." It gestured, and the featureless plane around them changed. Now they stood in what appeared to be a vast library, shelves stretching endlessly in all directions, filled with books, scrolls, tablets, and storage media Mark couldn't even identify. "Knowledge," the entity said, Danny's face alight with an enthusiasm that was hauntingly familiar. "The collective wisdom of countless civilizations, countless realities. This could be yours, Mark. All of it. You need only accept your role as our vessel, our bridge." "And what happens to Earth if I do that?" Mark asked. "What happens to humanity when your reality merges with ours?" The entity smiled, a perfect, heartbreaking imitation of Danny's smile. "Change. Evolution. Some would be lost in the transition, yes. But those who survive would become more than human. As Daniel has become more than human." At the mention of Danny, something shifted in the vast library around them. A shadow moved between the shelves, something large and distorted, something that bore only the faintest resemblance to human form. "You want to see him, don't you?" the Dana figure asked, its voice gentle, persuasive. The real Daniel, not just our interpretation of him. He's here, Mark. He's been waiting for you. The shadow moved closer, and Mark felt a primal fear grip him. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't Danny, couldn't be Danny. Not anymore. No, he said firmly, backing away. This isn't real. None of this is real. You're trying to manipulate me, just like you manipulated my father. The Danny figure's expression hardened, the perfect simulation giving way to something colder, more alien. Reality is subjective, Mark Thayer, especially here in the hollow spaces. What you believe shapes what you perceive. Its voice changed, becoming the chorus again. But your belief cannot change what is. The door has been opened. The boundary is thinning. With or without your cooperation, we are coming through. The library dissolved around them, replaced by a view of the stone circle in the hollow. But from above, as if Mark were floating over it. He could see his own body still standing at the center, frozen in place, the pendant glowing on the altar stone before him. Outside the circle, Harold and Ellie were desperately trying to enter, only to be repelled by an invisible barrier. And from the center of the circle, from the place where the resonator stood, a darkness was spreading. Not just an absence of light, but a negation of reality itself. The boundary between worlds was rupturing, and through the rupture, things were beginning to emerge. Shapes that hurt to look at, entities that existed in more dimensions than the human mind could process. You see, the chorus said, using Danny's mouth, it has already begun. The cycle is complete. 23 years of preparation, coming to fruition. Mark watched in horror as the rupture widened, as more of the entities began to pour through into the hollow. If they reached beyond the stone circle, if they entered the world at large. Why me? He demanded, turning back to the entity wearing his brother's face. Why did it have to be me? Why make my father summon me back to King's Hollow? Because you are the key, the entity replied simply. The bloodline of those who first opened the door to us, combined with the blood of those who sought to contain us. Wicker and Thayer, you are the perfect vessel, the one who can exist in both worlds simultaneously, who can stabilize the merger of realities. And if I refuse? The entity gestured to the scene below, where the rupture continued to widen. Then this happens anyway, but chaotically, destructively. Millions die as the hollow spaces collapse into your reality. Or, it paused, studying Mark with those not quite right eyes. Or you use the pendant not to seal us away, but to control the merger, to guide it, to save as many as possible. Mark looked down at the scene in the hollow, at his own body standing frozen at the center of an apocalypse in the making. Was the entity telling the truth? Was it too late to seal the hollow? Or was this just another manipulation, another lie to get him to cooperate? He thought of his father, of the 23 years William Thayer had spent trying to undo his mistake, to bring Danny back, to protect the world from what he'd unleashed. He thought of Harold and Ellie, risking their lives to help him stop the entities. And he thought of Danny, not the thing wearing his brother's face, but the real Danny, the 7-year-old who had disappeared into this nightmare 23 years ago. No, Mark said firmly. I don't believe you. This is just another trick. He focused his mind on the pendant, on its purpose, on what Harold and Ellie had told him it could do. If he was in some kind of mental space, some hollow between dimensions, then perhaps his will, his belief still held power here. The pendant doesn't just seal the hollow, he realized aloud. It's a key, can open or close the door. My father understood that toward the end. The Danny figure's expression flickered, uncertainty crossing its two perfect features. You cannot undo what has already begun. The cycle is complete. The boundary is failing. Maybe, Mark acknowledged, but cycles can be broken. Boundaries can be reinforced. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the pendant, on its connection to him, to his bloodline, to the hollow itself. You said it yourself, belief shapes reality here. When he opened his eyes again, the pendant was in his hand, not physically, but a mental construct of it, glowing with the same light he'd seen when he placed it on the altar stone. The entity wearing Danny's face backed away, its form beginning to waver, to lose cohesion. "You cannot," it insisted, its voice no longer a perfect imitation of Danny's but something older, colder. "You are ours. You have always been ours." "No," Mark said with certainty he didn't entirely feel. "I'm my own, and I'm ending this cycle. Now." He thrust the pendant toward the rupture in reality, focusing all his will, all his belief, on sealing the boundary between worlds. The pendant flared, its light becoming blinding, its engravings burning with blue-white fire. The rupture began to contract, the darkness receding, the entities being pulled back into the hollow spaces. The Danny figure reached for Mark, its form losing all pretense of humanity, becoming something of angles and voids and too many limbs. "You doom him," it hissed in that chorus of thousands. "Your brother. He will remain trapped here forever. Is that what you want, Mark Thayer? To abandon him again?" Mark hesitated, doubt creeping in. What if it was telling the truth? What if Danny really was still here, still conscious after 23 years? Could Mark really condemn him to an eternity in this place of madness? As if sensing his doubt, the entity pressed harder. "He's here, Mark. He's waiting for you. Call to him. See for yourself." Against his better judgment, Mark called out, "Danny? Danny, are you here?" For a moment there was silence. Then, from somewhere in the swirling chaos of the collapsing rupture, a voice, small, frightened, but recognizably Danny's. Not the adult simulation the entity had created, but the 7-year-old boy Mark remembered. "Mark, is that you?" The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. "It's so dark here, Mark. I'm scared." Mark's heart contracted painfully. "Danny, where are you? I can't see you." "Here." The voice seemed to come from the heart of the rupture, from the darkness that was rapidly shrinking as the pendant's power sealed the boundary. "Help me, Mark. Please." Mark moved toward the voice instinctively, drawn by a big brother's protective instinct, by 23 years of guilt and grief. The entity, sensing its advantage, retreated, allowing Mark to approach the rupture. As he neared the boundary between worlds, the voices of Harold and Ellie seemed to reach him from far away, calling his name, warning him to stay back. But all Mark could focus on was Danny's voice, calling to him from the darkness. He reached the edge of the rupture, peering into the swirling chaos beyond. "Danny, take my hand." From the darkness, something reached back. A small hand, a child's hand. Mark grabbed it without hesitation, pulling with all his strength. The hand in his grip changed, elongated, fingers multiplying, becoming something inhuman. Mark tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. The entity had tricked him, had used his love for his brother as a weapon against him. "Fool!" the chorus hissed, pulling him toward the rupture. "The key opens both ways. You come to us or we come to you. Either way, the hollow spaces merge with your world." Mark struggled, but the entity's grip was implacable. He was being dragged into the rupture, into the hollow spaces beyond, even as the pendant in his other hand continued to try to seal the boundary. Then, from somewhere beyond his perception, Mark heard another voice. His father's voice, unmistakable in its gruff certainty. "The pendant, Mark. Use it like I showed you." But his father hadn't shown him anything. Had he? Mark's mind raced, trying to remember. The journal, the letter, had there been instructions he'd missed? Some crucial detail lost when the documents vanished? As he continued to struggle against the entity's pull, a memory surfaced. Not of his father's writing, but of something Harold had said back at the stone circle. "The pendant responds to the blood of those connected to the hollow. The wicker bloodline. Your bloodline. Blood." The pendant needed blood to fully activate, to seal the hollow permanently. His blood, the blood of a wicker, the blood of a Thayer, the perfect combination to undo what his ancestors had begun. With his free hand, Mark pressed the edge of the pendant against his palm, its sharp edge breaking the skin. Blood welled up, covering the engravings, seeping into the stone. The effect was immediate and catastrophic, at least for the entities. The pendant's glow changed from blue-white to deep crimson, its power multiplying exponentially. The rupture began to close faster, the boundary between worlds hardening, crystallizing. The entity howled, a sound of rage and desperation that transcended language. Its grip on Mark tightened painfully, bones threatening to snap. But Mark held his ground, focusing all his will on the pendant, on sealing the hollow, on ending the threat once and for all. "You can't have him!" A new voice shouted. A child's voice, familiar and yet changed, hardened by years in the darkness. "Let him go!" And there, impossibly, was Danny, or what remained of him. A thin, pale figure, still wearing the clothes he disappeared in 23 years ago. Still physically 7 years old, but with eyes that held centuries of awareness, of suffering. He launched himself at the entity gripping Mark, his small hands tearing at the impossible angles and geometries of its form. "Run, Mark. Go back. I'll hold it." "Danny!" Mark cried, torn between the need to complete the sealing and the desperate desire to save his brother. "Come with me. We can both get out." Danny looked at him, and for a moment, Mark saw his little brother clearly. Not corrupted, not changed, just Danny, exactly as he remembered him. "I can't go back, Mark. I'm part of this place now. But you can seal it. You can make sure they never hurt anyone else." "I can't leave you here," Mark protested. Even as the pendant in his hand grew hotter, the sealing process nearing completion, Danny smiled. A sad, knowing smile no 7-year-old should possess. "You never left me, Mark. You came back, just like you promised." Had he promised? Mark still couldn't remember, but something in Danny's eyes told him it was true, that somewhere, somehow, he had made that vow to his little brother. "Now go," Danny urged, still struggling with the entity. "Before it's too late." The rupture was nearly closed, the boundary almost completely restored. Mark had seconds, at most, to make his decision. Stay with Danny in the hollow spaces forever, or return to his own world and seal the hollow permanently. With a cry of mingled grief and determination, Mark thrust the blood-covered pendant into the heart of the rupture. There was a sound like glass shattering on a cosmic scale, and then a wave of energy exploded outward, flinging Mark backward. He was falling again, but this time he knew where he was going, back to his body, back to the stone circle, back to his own reality. The last thing he saw before the hollow spaces vanished from his perception was Danny, his brother, standing brave and defiant against the darkness, a small figure holding back the void. And then Mark was back in his body, gasping for breath, collapsing to his knees at the center of the stone circle. The pendant on the altar stone was glowing crimson, its light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Around him, the disruptors had reactivated, their humming forming a perfect harmony with the pendant's resonance. The resonator was gone. Not destroyed, but simply gone, as if it had never existed. The air felt cleaner, lighter, the oppressive atmosphere of the hollow lifted for the first time in centuries. Harold and Ellie rushed to him, finally able to enter the circle now that the barrier had fallen. They helped him to his feet, their faces etched with concern and wonder. "You did it?" Harold breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You sealed the hollow, permanently." "The readings are gone," Ellie confirmed, checking the detector. "No electromagnetic fluctuations, no radiation. It's just normal space now." But Mark barely heard them. His mind was still in that other place with Danny, the brother he'd found only to lose again, the brother who had sacrificed himself to save not just Mark, but the entire world. "He was there," Mark said, his voice hoarse. "Danny, he was real. He saved me." Harold and Ellie exchanged glances, their expressions somber. "What we saw, what the entities showed us," Harold began cautiously. "It wasn't always real, Mark. They could create perfect simulations, perfect copies." "No," Mark interrupted, certain to his core. "It was him, the real Danny. He held them back so I could escape, so I could seal the hollow." He looked at the pendant, still glowing on the altar stone, still pulsing with his blood. With carefully deliberate movements, he picked it up, feeling its weight, its significance. It had served its purpose, it had sealed the hollow, had protected the world from the entities that sought to invade it. But as he held it, Mark felt something else. A connection, faint but undeniable, to Danny. Not to the hollow spaces, not to the entities, but specifically to his brother. As if some part of Danny's consciousness, his essence, had imprinted on the pendant in those final moments. "He's not gone," Mark said quietly, closing his fingers around the pendant. "Not completely, and I'm going to find a way to bring him back. The right way, without opening the door again." Harold looked troubled. "Mark, the entities are masters of deception. What you think you experienced, what you think you felt." "I know what I felt," Mark insisted. "I know what I saw, and I know my brother saved my life. Saved all our lives." He turned to Ellie. "You said my father spent 23 years researching the hollow, trying to find a way to bring Danny back without letting the entities through. There must be something in his notes, in his research. Most of it was in the journal," Ellie said gently. "The journal that's now gone." "Then we'll start from scratch," Mark said, determination hardening his voice. "We have the pendant. We have the stone circle. We have whatever knowledge you and Harold have gathered over the years. And we have time." He looked around the hollow, at the stone circle that now felt ordinary, just ancient rocks arranged by human hands, at the ground that no longer seemed to slope inward unnaturally, at the night sky visible through the trees, stars shining in familiar patterns. "The hollow is sealed," he continued. "The world is safe. But Danny is still out there somewhere, and I'm going to find him. I promised." As they made their way back through the dark woods toward the Thayer house, the pendant warm against Mark's chest, he felt a sense of both ending and beginning. The 23-year cycle had been broken. The hollow between the hills was just a hollow now, a natural depression in the landscape, its otherworldly aspects sealed away perhaps forever. But another cycle was beginning, a quest to understand what had really happened to Danny, to find a way to reach him without reopening the door to the entities. It might take years, decades even, but Mark had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. When they reached the edge of the woods, Mark paused, looking back at the barely visible outline of the hollow in the darkness. For a moment, just the briefest instant, he thought he saw a small figure standing at the edge of the trees, a 7-year-old boy with a gap-toothed smile waving goodbye. Then the figure was gone, and there was only the night, the trees, and the soft weight of the pendant against his skin. A reminder of what had been lost, and of what might, someday, be found again. Epilogue. 1 year later, Mark Thayer sat in his father's workshop. His workshop now, surrounded by notes, diagrams, and research materials. The pendant hung from a stand at the center of his workbench, its engravings catching the light, its stones seeming to pulse occasionally with an inner light. He'd taken a sabbatical from teaching, moved permanently to King's Hollow. The town no longer felt oppressive to him, no longer carried the weight of dread it once had. With the hollow sealed, King's Hollow was just a small town in New England, quiet and ordinary. But Mark knew better. The hollow might be sealed, but its effects lingered, in the town's history, in its people, and most of all, in the pendant that now served as both his research subject and his connection to Danny. For the pendant did contain a connection. He was certain of it now. In quiet moments, when his mind was still, Mark sometimes heard Danny's voice, faint but unmistakable, speaking to him through whatever link the pendant had established. Not trapped, not suffering, but existing in some state Mark couldn't fully comprehend. Waiting. Harold and Ellie had become his partners in research, bringing their own expertise to bear on the problem. They were cautious, skeptical of Mark's certainty that Danny could be brought back without reopening the hollow. But they helped nonetheless, driven by their own curiosity and by the undeniable evidence that something of Danny Thayer continued to exist beyond conventional understanding. On the wall of the workshop hung a photograph, the black and white image of the stone circle from 1887, with its blurred figure at the edge. Mark had studied it countless times, noting the similarities between the figure and descriptions of the entities from his father's now-vanished journal. Physical evidence of what had once existed in the hollow between the hills. Next to it hung a new photograph, a picture of Danny taken the summer before his disappearance, grinning widely at the camera, one tooth missing, eyes squinting against the sun. a reminder of what Mark was working toward, of the promise he had made and intended to keep. Outside, the seasons turned, the cycle of nature continuing without interruption. The 23-year pattern was broken. The hollow was just a hollow now. But some cycles continued, the cycle of birth and death, of loss and discovery, of questions asked and answers sought. And in the quiet of the workshop, in the depths of the night when the boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness grew thin, Mark sometimes felt a presence. Not threatening, not alien, but familiar. Beloved, I'm coming for you, Danny. He would whisper to the empty air, to the pendant, to whatever might be listening beyond the sealed hollow between worlds. Just hold on. I'm coming. And somewhere, in a place that was neither here nor there, neither hollow nor whole, a small boy smiled and continued to wait for his big brother to keep his promise. The end. The Hollow, Part 1, The Return. Adam Kelly squinted at the faded green road sign as a bitter October wind shook his rental car. After 15 years away, he was back in Kings Hollow. Main population now 1,216. Down nearly 300 since he'd left. The sign looked the same, though. Same peeling paint, same bullet hole in the upper corner from some drunk's hunting rifle. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and forced himself to push down on the accelerator. Just 5 days. That's all he needed to get his father's house ready to sell. 5 days in this place that had left more scars on him than the accident. Adam flexed his left hand, feeling the familiar tightness of the burned tissue that wrapped around his wrist like a glove. The doctors had done what they could, but 15 years later, it still pulled when he was tired or stressed. And coming back to Kings Hollow qualified as both. The town materialized slowly from the thick pine forests, unchanged in that peculiar way of dying rural communities. Boarded storefronts along Main Street wore the same faded paint, just more chipped away. The dairy freeze where he'd spent summers scooping ice cream was now shuttered, a for lease sign hanging crookedly in the window. He slowed as he passed Milligan's Hardware, relieved to see it was still open, lights glowing warm against the gathering dusk. His father's house sat at the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to gravel that eventually disappeared into Blackwood Forest. Adam slowed the car as he approached the turn onto Sycamore Lane. The old mailbox was still there, Kelly hand-painted in his mother's neat script, though the paint had nearly vanished with time. As he turned into the driveway, the house came into view. 2 stories of weathered clapboard the color of dirty dishwater, with a sagging front porch and shutters that hung at odd angles. It looked smaller than he remembered. Everything did. Adam parked and sat for a long moment, gathering himself. The key he'd received from his father's lawyer felt unnaturally heavy in his pocket. Robert Kelly had been dead for 3 weeks now, found by a neighbor after he'd failed to show up at the diner for his regular Saturday breakfast. Heart attack, they said. Quick and painless, they said. Adam wondered if that was true or just what they told the estranged son who hadn't spoken to his father since the night of the fire. The house creaked a welcome as he pushed open the front door. The smell hit him immediately. Cigarettes, old coffee, and something underneath. A faintly medicinal odor that reminded him of hospitals. The lawyer had mentioned hospice care in the final months, though his father had refused to tell Adam about his declining health. Adam flipped on lights as he moved through the house. Little had changed. The same faux wood paneling in the living room. The same plaid couch. The same collection of fishing trophies gathering dust on shelves. The only things his father had ever seemed truly proud of. In the kitchen, a calendar still hung on the wall. October's page showing a picturesque New England covered bridge surrounded by fall foliage. His father had X'd out each day until October 3rd. The day he died. 3 neat lines forming each X, with the final stroke missing on that last day. Adam dropped his duffel bag on the kitchen table and noticed an envelope propped against the salt and pepper shakers. His name was written on it in his father's shaky scrawl. Adam, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm gone. Doc Webb says it could be any time now. I know we haven't spoken, but I'm leaving you the house and what little else I have. Do with it what you want. There's something you should know. About that night. About what happened in the hollow. I should have told you years ago. It wasn't your fault. It never was. It's been happening in King's Hollow for generations. Look in the shed. Bottom drawer of the red toolbox. I kept everything I found. Be careful out there. Things have been stirring again. The ground in the hollow is moving. Dad. Adam read the note twice. A chill working its way up his spine that had nothing to do with the drafty house. The hollow. He hadn't let himself think about that place in years. The depression in Blackwood Forest. A place where nothing grew. Where the ground was perpetually spongy underfoot. Where he and his friends had gone that summer night when they were 17, drunk on stolen beer and the invincibility of youth. The night Jenny died. The night of the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the kitchen window in its frame. Adam folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. Tomorrow, he told himself. He'd look in the shed tomorrow. Tonight, he just needed to sleep, to prepare himself for 5 days of sorting through his father's life, boxing up the remnants of their broken relationship. But sleep, when it finally came on his father's lumpy couch, brought only dreams of the hollow of Jenny's laugh cutting off into a scream, of the ground suddenly giving way beneath them, of fire racing up his arm as he tried to reach her. And underneath it all, a rhythmic sound like a heartbeat coming from deep within the earth. Thump thump, thump thump. Adam woke with his heart racing and sweat soaking his t-shirt, the phantom pain in his scarred hand almost unbearable. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees, and in the distance, a crow called out a warning. Welcome home, it seemed to say. Welcome back to King's Hollow. Adam spent the morning sorting through the kitchen cabinets, separating the few items worth keeping from the many destined for donation or trash. His father had never been one for sentiment, but he'd kept the same chipped coffee mug, world's greatest dad in faded letters, that Adam had given him for Father's Day when he was 8. The work was mechanical enough to keep his hands busy, but his mind kept returning to his father's note. Look in the shed. Bottom drawer of the red toolbox. By noon, he couldn't resist any longer. The shed stood at the back of the property, a small structure of weathered wood that leaned slightly to one side. It had been his father's sanctuary, a place where Robert Kelly would retreat to tinker with fishing lures or simply escape from the quiet house that had grown too loud with absence after Adam's mother died. A padlock secured the door, but the key on Adam's ring slid in smoothly. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the dirty windows. The shed smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and the peculiar tang of metal tools. The red toolbox sat on the workbench, exactly where it had always been. Adam ran his fingers over its dented surface before pulling it open. The top drawers contained the expected assortment of screwdrivers, wrenches, and other tools, all meticulously organized. The bottom drawer stuck slightly, and Adam had to jerk it hard to slide it open. Inside was a manila folder, its edges worn soft with handling. Written on the tab in his father's neat block letters was a single word: hollow. Adam lifted the folder with trembling hands and opened it on the workbench. Newspaper clippings, some yellowed with age, others more recent. Photographs, handwritten notes on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. The oldest clipping was dated 1879, its text barely legible. Tragedy at Blackwood Hollow. 3 children missing after ground collapse. Search continues. Another from 1921. Mysterious deaths plague King's Hollow. 2 loggers found deceased near Blackwood Depression. Causes unknown. Authorities baffled by strange markings. And more every 30-odd years like clockwork. 1957, 1988, and then 2010, the year Adam and his friends had gone to the Hollow. The year of the fire. Local teen dead. Another injured in forest accident. Jennifer Patterson, 17, died Friday night when ground collapsed during a bonfire in Blackwood Forest. Adam Kelly, 17, suffered severe burns attempting rescue. Adam closed his eyes against the memory. Jenny's terrified face as the ground beneath the bonfire suddenly gave way, her hand reaching for his, their fingers almost touching before she was gone, swallowed by the earth. The sudden rush of flame as the fire collapsed inward, catching his left arm as he lunged for her. He told everyone it was an accident. The ground simply caved in. But in his nightmares, he remembered something else. The earth pulsing beneath their feet like something breathing, and in the moment before Jenny fell, the distinct feeling that something below had reached up and pulled. Adam forced himself to continue through the folder. His father had compiled personal accounts, interviews with Kings Hollow's oldest residents recounting stories passed down through generations. Tales of the Hollow being a hungry place, of disappearances dating back to the original settlement in the early 1800s, of strange sounds coming from beneath the earth. But it was the photographs that made Adam's blood run cold. Recent ones, dated just weeks before his father's death. The hollow at dawn, mist rising from the ground, and in the center, barely visible through the fog, what looked like a mound rising from the depression that had claimed Jenny's life. A mound that resembled nothing so much as a massive, swollen pustule on the forest floor. On the back of the photo, his father had written, "It's growing again, just like in '88, just like when Marie disappeared." Marie, Adam's mother. The official story had always been that Marie Kelly had left town, abandoned her husband and 8-year-old son. Adam had spent most of his life believing his mother had chosen to leave them. But his father's notes suggested something far more sinister. Had she gone to the hollow? Had it taken her too? Adam's hands shook as he gathered the materials back into the folder. Outside, the sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds rolling in from the east. The first fat drops of rain began to hit the shed's roof as he locked the door behind him and hurried back to the house. Inside, he spread the contents of the folder across the kitchen table and began to read more carefully. His father had been methodical, creating a timeline of events, noting patterns. Every 33 years, the hollow seemed to awaken. As one account put it, disappearances would follow. And then, silence for another generation. Long enough for memories to fade and warnings to be forgotten. 2010 had been one of those years. And now, according to his father's notes, something was stirring again years ahead of schedule. The phone rang, startling Adam from his reading. He hadn't even realized the landline was still connected. He picked up the receiver cautiously. "Hello, Adam? Adam Kelly?" The voice was familiar, though older, rougher than he remembered. "Yes, who's this?" "It's Mike. Mike Derringer. Heard you were back in town." Mike. They'd been inseparable once. Mike, Jenny, and himself. The three musketeers until that night in the hollow. After Jenny's death and Adam's hospitalization, Mike had withdrawn, refusing to talk about what happened. By the time Adam was released from the burn unit, Mike had joined the army, leaving town without saying goodbye. "Mike, yeah, I'm just here to clear out my dad's place." Adam paused. "How did you know I was back?" A dry laugh came through the line. "It's King's Hollow. Betsy at the gas station saw you drive through yesterday. News travels fast, right? Some things never changed. It's been a long time. Too long." Mike's voice dropped lower. "Listen, we need to talk. About the hollow. About what really happened that night." Adam's grip tightened on the receiver. "What do you mean?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Dobbs Tavern? 8 o'clock. Adam hesitated. He'd planned to spend the evening continuing through his father's research, but the urgency in Mike's voice was impossible to ignore. "I'll be there." After hanging up, Adam returned to the table, but his concentration was broken. Outside, the rain had increased to a steady downpour, drumming against the roof. As he gathered the papers back into the folder, his eye caught a detailed map his father had drawn of Blackwood Forest, with the hollow clearly marked at its center. Around it, in a perfect circle, Robert Kelly had noted 7 distinct locations, each marked with a small X. At the bottom of the map was a notation. Possible entry points? Ancient stone markers found at each site. Adam stared at the map for a long moment before folding it carefully and placing it in his pocket alongside his father's note. Then he grabbed his raincoat from his duffel bag and headed for the door. Dobbs Tavern wasn't far, and suddenly the house felt too quiet, too full of ghosts and questions he wasn't ready to face alone. Part 2: The Revelation. Dobbs Tavern hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same neon beer signs, same scarred wooden bar, Same smell of stale beer and ancient fryer oil. Adam pushed through the door at 10 minutes to 8, shaking rain from his coat. The place was about half full, mostly men nursing beers alone or in small, quiet groups. A few heads turned as he entered, followed by the whispered recognition that ripples through small towns when a prodigal returns. Adam ignored them and took a seat at the bar, ordering a whiskey from a bartender he didn't recognize. "Make it 2, said a voice beside him, and Adam turned to find Mike Derringer sliding onto the adjacent stool. Time had been both kind and cruel to Mike. The lanky teenager had filled out into a solid man with broad shoulders and strong hands. But his eyes were older than his 32 years, shadowed with the same kind of exhaustion Adam saw in his own mirror. "You look good," Mike said, though his eyes lingered on the scarred tissue visible on Adam's left hand. "You too," Adam nodded. "Military, 10 years, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Now I'm back here working at the paper mill." Mike accepted the whiskey the bartender placed before him, raising it slightly. "To homecomings." Adam clinked glasses mechanically. "To homecomings." They drank in silence for a moment, the weight of 15 unspoken years hanging between them. "I'm sorry," Mike finally said, staring into his glass. "About what happened to Jenny. About your hand. About not being there when you got out of the hospital." Adam nodded, accepting the apology without quite forgiving. "You said we needed to talk about the hollow, about what really happened." Mike glanced around the bar, then leaned in closer. "Not here. Too many ears. Can you drive?" 20 minutes later, they were in Adam's rental car, headed toward the outskirts of town. Rain lashed against the windshield as Mike directed him to turn onto a narrow dirt road that Adam didn't remember. "My place," Mike explained as a small cabin came into view. "Dad left it to me when he passed. It's not much, but it's quiet." Inside, Mike lit a kerosene lamp, casting long shadows across the simple space. A wood stove occupied one corner, a neatly made bed another. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with military history and, somewhat incongruously, books on geology and local folklore. Mike motioned Adam to the table, then retrieved a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses from a cabinet. After pouring them each a generous measure, he reached under his bed and pulled out a lockbox. "I've never shown this to anyone," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain hammering on the tin roof. "After what happened, I tried to forget. Joined the army, stayed away as long as I could, but it kept pulling me back. The dreams wouldn't stop." "Dreams?" Adam asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Mike nodded grimly as he unlocked the box. "Of Jenny, of the hollow, of what's underneath." He looked up sharply. "You've had them too, haven't you? That's why you never came back until now." Adam didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. From the box, Mike removed a leather-bound journal and placed it on the table between them. "This was my grandfather's. He gave it to me the day I enlisted, told me to read it when I was far away from King's Hollow. Said it would explain why my father drank himself to death. Why he always warned us to stay away from the hollow." Adam opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting and detailed sketches. Cross-sections of the earth beneath Blackwood Forest, diagrams of tunnels, and drawings of something that looked like a massive, segmented worm. "My grandfather was a geologist," Mike explained. "In the 50s, he was part of a team investigating the hollow after 3 people disappeared there. What they found..." He trailed off, taking a long swallow of bourbon. "Well, it's all in there, but they were ordered to keep it quiet. Something about national security, about not wanting to cause a panic." Adam flipped through the pages, his heart racing as he recognized descriptions that matched his father's notes. According to Mike's grandfather, the hollow wasn't a natural formation at all, but evidence of something vast living beneath the forest, something that periodically stirred, causing the ground to shift and collapse. And when it stirred, it fed. "He called it the Dweller," Mike said softly. "Some kind of ancient creature that hibernates for decades at a time. When it wakes, it needs to feed before returning to sleep. That's the cycle, every 33 years. But my father's notes," Adam said, pulling the map from his pocket. He said it was waking again years early. That's not possible if the pattern holds. Mike's face went pale as he studied the map. Shit, the markers. He found the markers. He looked up at Adam, fear naked in his eyes. My grandfather wrote about those 7 stone formations in a circle around the hollow. Native Americans from this area believed they were binding stones that kept the dweller asleep. And 3 of them were disturbed in 1988 during logging operations. That's why it woke up early then, why it took those loggers. And why? Mike hesitated. Why it might have taken your mother. Adam felt as if he'd been struck. You knew? You knew my mother didn't just leave. Mike shook his head quickly. I didn't know for sure, but my father once said something when he was drunk, about how your dad should tell you the truth about the hollow, about Marie. The pieces were suddenly clicking into horrible place. His father's note. It wasn't your fault. It never was. The timeline in the research. His mother's disappearance in 1988, when the hollow had last awakened ahead of schedule. And now it's happening again, Adam said, his voice hollow. Something's disturbed the markers. Mike nodded grimly. If your dad's notes are right, we need to check those stones. All 7 need to be intact, or the rest of the sentence hung unspoken between them. Or it will wake again. Or more people will disappear. Or what happened to Jenny will happen to others. We'll go at first light, Adam decided, draining his glass. Check the markers, see what we're dealing with. As if in response, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, making both men jump. The kerosene lamp flickered, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the wall. Stay here tonight, Mike offered. I've got a couch. No sense driving back in this. Adam agreed, though sleep proved elusive. He lay on Mike's couch, listening to the storm rage outside and turning over the revelations of the evening in his mind. His mother hadn't abandoned them. She'd been taken, just like Jenny, and his father had known all along, had perhaps always known the truth about the hollow. In the darkest hour of the night, as rain continued to pound the roof, Adam finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, and in his dreams, he was 17 again, standing at the edge of the hollow with Jenny and Mike, feeling the ground pulse beneath his feet like a massive heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. But in the dream, he could see what lay beneath. An enormous pale form, segmented like an earthworm but with a mouth that opened in 3 directions, lined with row upon row of teeth. And in that mouth, still alive, still screaming, were all those who had disappeared over the generations, including his mother, her arms reaching up toward him as the creature's massive jaw began to close. Adam woke with a shout, sweat-soaked and trembling, to find Mike standing over him with a cup of coffee. Bad one? Mike asked simply. Adam nodded, accepting the coffee with shaking hands. Did you? Yeah, Mike confirmed, his face grim in the early morning light. Same dream, different details, but same thing. He couldn't bring himself to describe it further. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and eerily still. The forest beyond Mike's cabin dripped with moisture, and a thick mist clung to the ground, obscuring the undergrowth. Perfect weather, Adam thought grimly, for hunting monsters. They set out after a quick breakfast, armed with Mike's grandfather's journal, Robert Kelly's map, a pair of shotguns, and enough supplies for a day in the woods. According to the map, the nearest marker was less than a mile from Mike's cabin, on the eastern edge of the circle surrounding the hollow. The forest was unnaturally quiet as they hiked. No birdsong or scurrying of small animals. Just the sound of water dripping from leaves and their own cautious footsteps on the soggy ground. There, Mike said after 40 minutes of walking, pointing to a clearing ahead. The marker was a crude standing stone about 4 feet tall, partially covered in moss. Symbols were carved into its surface, spirals and lines that might have been a primitive language or simply decorative. It stood upright, apparently undisturbed. 1 down, 6 to go, Adam said, marking the location as intact on his father's map. They moved clockwise around the circle, finding the 2nd and 3rd markers similarly untouched. But as they approached the location of the 4th, Both men sensed something was wrong before they even reached the clearing. The trees in the area were bent and broken, as if something massive had moved through them. Deep ruts scarred the forest floor, filling with muddy water from the previous night's rain. Logging equipment, Mike said, crouching to examine the tracks. Recent, too. Within the last month. The marker itself lay toppled, broken cleanly in two. The top half had been pushed aside to make way for the heavy machinery that had carved through this section of forest. "Shit," Mike muttered, running his hand along the broken stone. "Just like in '88, they're cutting again where they shouldn't be." Adam felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. According to the combined research of his father and Mike's grandfather, even one broken marker would be enough to disturb the dweller's sleep. And now, with the hollow already showing signs of activity, "We need to check the others," he said grimly. "And then we need to see the hollow for ourselves." The fifth marker was intact, standing sentinel in a small clearing of ferns. But the sixth, located near an old logging road, had been completely uprooted, likely by the same equipment that had damaged the fourth. "Two down," Mike said, his voice tight with tension. "That's not good. In '88, only one was disturbed before people started disappearing." The final marker stood at the western edge of the circle, closest to town. It was the largest of the seven, nearly 6 feet tall and covered in more elaborate carvings. As they approached, Adam felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air, a pressure against his eardrums as if they were deep underwater. Mike felt it too, pausing mid-step with a grimace. "You feel that?" Adam nodded, pushing forward despite the discomfort. The stone stood in the center of a perfect circle of bare earth where nothing grew, no grass, no weeds, not even moss on the stone itself. The carvings here were different from the others, more precise, depicting what appeared to be a stylized worm or snake devouring itself. "It's intact," Adam confirmed, though he made no move to approach the stone more closely. Something about it repelled him, made his scarred hand throb with phantom pain. "So 2 out of 7 are broken," Mike summarized, keeping his distance from the stone as well. "What does that mean for us? For the town?" Adam pulled out his father's notes, scanning them quickly. According to this, the binding weakens proportionally to the number of markers disturbed. 2 out of 7 means the dweller is about 30% awake, Mike finished, having apparently made the same calculation in his head. Enough to stir, maybe enough to sense movement above it, but not enough to fully wake and feed. Yet Adam wanted to add, but didn't. "Not fully awake yet. We need to see the hollow," he said instead. "See what we're dealing with." Mike hesitated, fear flashing briefly across his face before he mastered it. "You're right, but Adam, we should be careful. If what my grandfather wrote is true, the dweller can sense movement above it when it's stirring, and it can influence things, make the ground unstable." Adam thought of Jenny, of the earth suddenly giving way beneath her feet. Had it been random, or had the creature somehow targeted her? Sensed her life force and reached up through the soil to claim it? The hollow lay at the exact center of the circle formed by the 7 markers. As they approached, the forest grew sparser, trees giving way to scrubby undergrowth, then to bare earth. The depression itself was perhaps 100 yards across, a perfectly circular bowl in the earth where nothing grew. They stopped at the edge, neither willing to step onto the bare soil of the hollow itself. From this vantage point, Adam could see what his father had photographed, a mound rising from the center of the depression, like a blister on the skin of the earth. "It's bigger," he said, pulling out the photograph to compare. "Bigger than when my father took this picture." Mike nodded grimly. "It's growing, pushing up as it stirs." He consulted his grandfather's journal. According to this, when the mound breaks open, that's when the dweller is fully awake. Adam stared at the misshapen hump of earth, trying to imagine the creature beneath the massive, segmented form from his nightmare, with its 3-part mouth full of teeth. Somewhere below, still alive if his dream was to be believed, were all those who had disappeared, including his mother and Jenny. The thought made him take an involuntary step forward, onto the bare soil of the hollow. Immediately, he felt it, a subtle vibration through the soles of his boots, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to match the beating of his own heart. Thump thump, thump thump. Adam, Mike hissed, reaching out to grab his arm. Get back! But Adam stood transfixed, feeling the vibration grow stronger, more insistent. And then, so faintly he thought he might be imagining it, a voice. Jenny's voice, calling his name from somewhere far below. Adam, help me. We're still here. Do you hear that? He whispered, turning to Mike, whose face had gone chalk white. We need to go, Mike said, his voice strained. Now, Adam. The ground beneath Adam's feet shifted suddenly, the hard-packed soil turning soft, beginning to give way. He stumbled backward just as a small sinkhole opened where he had been standing, the earth collapsing inward with a soft sighing sound. Mike dragged him back to the edge of the hollow, both men breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Jesus Christ, Mike panted. It nearly got you. It knows we're here. Adam stared at the fresh sinkhole, his mind racing. Had he really heard Jenny? Or was it the creature mimicking her voice, trying to lure him in? Either way, one thing was certain. The dweller was awakening, and 2 broken stones were enough to give it partial power. We need to fix the markers, he said firmly. Reset the binding before it fully wakes. Mike looked at him incredulously. How? The stones are broken. Adam thought of his father's research, of the patterns he'd documented over generations. There must be a way. Someone must have repaired them before, or the town wouldn't still be here. He pulled out the map again. My father marked these locations for a reason. He was tracking this, studying it. There must be something in his notes about how to restore the binding. As if in response, a deep rumble came from the center of the hollow, and both men watched in horror as the mound visibly pulsed once, growing slightly larger. Whatever we're going to do, Mike said, backing away from the edge, we need to do it fast. That thing is waking up, and when it does... He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. They both knew what happened when the dweller fully awakened. Fed. Part 3, The Reckoning. Night was falling by the time they made it back to Adam's father's house. A premature darkness settling over King's Hollow as thick clouds gathered once more on the horizon. Another storm was brewing, as if the heavens themselves sensed what was stirring beneath the earth. Adam spread his father's research across the kitchen table while Mike built a fire in the old wood stove to ward off the deepening chill. Neither had spoken much on the trek back from the hollow, each lost in his own thoughts, processing what they had witnessed. There has to be something here, Adam muttered, scanning through the meticulous notes. My father wouldn't have just documented the problem without looking for a solution. His eye caught a section he'd overlooked before, a series of interviews with Sarah Little Creek, identified as last descendant of original Abenaki inhabitants. The old woman had spoken to Robert Kelly just months before his death, sharing what she called the old stories about the hollow and what lay beneath. The stones were placed by my ancestors, she had told him. 7 guardians to bind the hunger that sleeps. When the white settlers came, they cut down the sacred trees that helped power the binding. That's when the cycle began, the partial wakings, the feedings. Adam read aloud to Mike. She claims the original binding used natural elements, stone marked with symbols of containment, positioned at power points around the hollow, reinforced by 7 specific trees that no longer exist. Mike looked up from stoking the fire. Trees? What trees? Adam continued reading. According to Little Creek, each stone was paired with a guardian tree, a white ash grown from seeds soaked in a mixture of ingredients including, apparently, human blood freely given. He grimaced at that detail. The trees were cut down during early settlement, which weakened the binding, but the stones retained enough power to keep the creature mostly dormant except for brief periods every 33 years. So we need to restore the trees to strengthen the binding? Mike asked skeptically. Trees take decades to grow. Adam continued scanning the notes. Wait, there's more. Little Creek told my father that in an emergency, the binding could be temporarily reinforced by placing certain objects at each marker stone. His voice grew more excited as he read on. 7 objects of personal significance, freely surrendered by 7 individuals. The sacrifice strengthens the stone's power for another cycle. Sacrifice. Mike's voice cracked slightly on the word. Not like that, Adam clarified. Just objects of personal value, given up willingly. Symbols of connection to the living world above that help. I don't know, remind the stones of their purpose. He continued reading. Little Creek's grandmother was one of 7 who reinforced the binding in 1955, after a logging operation disturbed one of the markers. They each left something precious at a stone: wedding rings, family heirlooms, items of spiritual significance. And it worked, Mike asked, coming to look over Adam's shoulder. According to this, yes. The dweller returned to full dormancy without claiming any victims that cycle. Adam flipped through more pages. There are similar accounts from 1889 and 1922, though with fewer details. Mike paced the small kitchen, processing this information. So we need 7 people, 7 personal items of significance, and we need to place them at the stones before that thing in the hollow fully wakes up. He ran a hand through his hair. How long do we have? Adam returned to his father's most recent notes, the ones written in an increasingly shaky hand as his health failed. Based on his observations of the mound's growth rate, 3 days. Maybe 4. Jesus, Mike muttered. And we need to find 5 more people willing to give up something valuable based on a story about a monster under the forest? In this town, who's going to believe us? Adam thought for a moment, then reached for his father's address book, which sat beside the telephone. We don't need them to believe everything, just enough to help. He began flipping through pages. My father must have had allies in this, people he confided in about his research. Sure enough, several names were marked with small asterisks. Sheriff Tom Paulson, Doc Webb, Meredith Hanson at the library, and Sarah Little Creek herself. For names, Adam said. If they're all still alive, plus you and me, that's 6. We need 7, Mike reminded him. Adam nodded slowly. I know who the 7th might be. He hesitated. Jenny's sister, Kate. She deserves to know what really happened. And she might want to help. Mike looked dubious. Kate Patterson blames us, blames you especially, for what happened to Jenny. She's unlikely to join some crazy ritual in the woods. We have to try, Adam insisted. Everyone in this town is at risk if that thing fully wakes. The phone rang suddenly, startling them both. Adam reached for it cautiously. Hello? Adam Kelly? The voice was female, elderly, with a slight tremor. This is Sarah Little Creek. You don't know me, but your father was a friend. We need to talk. Adam's eyes widened as he looked at Mike. Ms. Little Creek, we were just discussing you, actually. How did you know I was here? A dry chuckle came through the line. The same way I know you and Mike Derringer visited the hollow today. The same way I know the hunger is stirring. Her voice grew serious. The binding is failing faster than it should. We have less time than you think. How much time? The storm coming tonight will feed its strength. By tomorrow's sunset, the mound will rupture. The old woman's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of the fear such a statement should carry. Come to me now. Bring what your father left you. She gave him an address on the outskirts of town and hung up before he could ask more questions. Well, Mike asked. We need to go, Adam said, gathering his father's folder. Now. They drove through darkening streets as the first drops of rain began to fall. Sarah Little Creek lived in a small blue house set back from the road, surrounded by gardens that seemed to thrive despite the October chill. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm light glowed behind curtained windows. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a tiny woman with silver hair pulled back in a braid and eyes so dark they appeared almost black. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt like any other resident of Kings Hollow, but around her neck hung a leather pouch decorated with beadwork. You've seen it, she said without preamble, her eyes fixed on Adam's face. The hunger, it's shown itself to you in dreams. Adam nodded, unsettled by her directness. Yes, since I was a teenager. She nodded as if confirming something, then stepped back. Come in, both of you. We have work to do. The interior of the house was warm and smelled of herbs and wood smoke. The living room walls were lined with bookshelves containing an eclectic mix of modern fiction, academic texts on anthropology, and what appeared to be hand-bound journals similar to the one Mike's grandfather had kept. Your father understood, Sarah said, gesturing for them to sit at a round table near the wood stove. Better than most white folks. He listened to the old stories, made connections. She looked at Adam with something like sympathy. He blamed himself for your mother, for not warning her about the hollow. He knew it would take her? Adam asked, his voice tight. Sarah shook her head. No one can know exactly who the hunger will choose, but he knew the risks of its stirring. She turned to Mike. And your grandfather knew too, tried to document it in his scientific way. Mike nodded. I have his journal. It mentions you, or perhaps your mother. My grandmother, Sarah corrected. She was part of the binding renewal in 55. She reached for Adam's folder. May I? Adam handed it over, watching as the elderly woman flipped through the pages with practiced ease, nodding occasionally. Your father did good work, she said finally. But there's more he didn't know. She fixed them both with a steady gaze. The binding is failing faster because someone is deliberately weakening it. Mike and Adam exchanged alarmed glances. Who would do that? Mike asked. Who even knows about this stuff besides us and maybe a handful of others? Sarah's expression was grim. Those who serve the hunger. Every generation it calls to certain people, promises them things, power, knowledge, safety from its appetite. You're saying there's some kind of cult? Adam couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Call it what you will, Sarah replied, but someone has been systematically damaging the markers. The logging operation was no accident. It was directed specifically to those locations. She tapped a weathered finger on the map showing the circle of stones. And they'll try to stop us from reinforcing the binding. Outside, thunder cracked directly overhead, making the windows rattle in their frames. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof. You said we have until tomorrow's sunset, Adam reminded her. We need 5 more people willing to participate in the ritual. Sarah nodded. I've already called Tom Paulson and Meredith Hansen. They've worked with me before monitoring the hollow. They'll meet us at dawn. She poured 3 cups of tea from a pot that had been steeping on the wood stove. Dr. Webb passed last winter, I'm afraid, but his daughter Emily knows some of the truth. She'll help. That's still only 6 of us, Mike pointed out. We need 7. Sarah sipped her tea calmly. 7 there must be. The 7th will come. She looked directly at Adam. You must bring Jennifer Patterson's sister, Catherine. She bears the same blood as one the hunger has already taken. That creates a powerful connection. Adam grimaced. Kate hasn't spoken to me since Jenny's funeral. She blames me for what happened. Nevertheless, Sarah said firmly, she must be the 7th. You must convince her. They spent the next hour going over the specifics of the ritual. Each person would need to surrender something of genuine personal value at one of the marker stones. The objects would need to be buried at the base of each stone at precisely the same moment, as the sun touched the horizon. What about the broken stones? Mike asked. 2 of them are damaged. Sarah nodded. They must be upright for the ritual to work. We'll need to prop them up as best we can. By the time they left Sarah's house, it was past midnight, and the storm was at its peak. They agreed that Adam would approach Kate Patterson in the morning while Mike went with Sarah to begin preparations at the marker sites. Back at his father's house, Adam lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. Every crack of thunder seemed to shake the foundations of the house, and in the brief flashes of lightning, the shadows on his wall appeared to writhe and pulse. Thump thump, thump thump. He could feel it now, the creature's awakening resonating through the earth, through the town itself. How many others in King's Hollow felt it too? How many dismissed it as nothing more than the vibrations of the storm, unaware of what stirred beneath their feet? Morning came gray and misty, the storm having moved on but leaving behind a world that seemed somehow thinner, as if the boundary between what lay above and below had been worn down by the night's fury. Adam showered and dressed carefully, choosing his least threatening sweater, trying to look as normal and stable as possible for his confrontation with Kate. He found her address in his father's book, still in Kings Hollow, just a few streets over from her childhood home. He rehearsed what he would say as he drove through the quiet Sunday morning streets. The truth seemed impossible. How could he explain a creature living beneath the forest that periodically consumed townspeople? That her sister might still be alive somewhere in its depths? That they needed her personal sacrifice to prevent others from sharing Jenny's fate? Kate's house was a neat bungalow with a small porch and flower boxes that had been recently winterized, the summer blooms replaced with hardy ornamental cabbages. Adam's courage nearly failed him as he walked up the steps, but the memory of the pulsing mound in the hollow spurred him forward. He knocked, and moments later the door opened to reveal Kate Patterson older, with strands of gray in her dark hair, but with the same heart-shaped face and determined chin as her sister. Recognition, followed by shock and then anger, flashed across her features. "Adam Kelly," she said flatly, "I heard you were back." Her hand tightened on the door as if preparing to slam it. "Kate, please," Adam said quickly. "I need 5 minutes of your time. It's important. It's about Jenny." Something in his tone must have reached her because, after a long moment, she stepped back, allowing him inside. The living room was comfortable but impersonal, like a space designed more for occasional guests than daily living. Kate remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "What about Jenny?" she asked coldly. "She's been dead for 15 years. What could possibly be important now?" Adam took a deep breath. "What if I told you she might not be dead? At least not in the way we think of death." Kate's expression hardened. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "No joke," Adam said, pulling out his father's folder. "Please just look at these. My father spent years researching what happened in the Hollow that night. What's been happening in King's Hollow for generations." Against her better judgment, Kate's curiosity got the better of her. She accepted the folder and began to flip through it, her skepticism gradually giving way to confusion, then disbelief. "This is insane," she said finally, looking up at Adam. "A monster under the forest? Binding stones? People being kept alive somehow after being swallowed by the earth?" She shook her head. "You can't possibly believe this." "I didn't want to," Adam admitted. "But I've seen things, Kate. At the Hollow yesterday. I heard Jenny's voice." He met her gaze directly. "And whatever you think of me, whatever you believe about that night, more people are going to disappear unless we act today." "Even if I believed any of this," Kate said, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Why me? Why do you need me specifically?" "Because you're connected to Jenny. Sarah Little Creek says that creates a powerful link that can help strengthen the binding." At the mention of Sarah's name, Kate's expression changed subtly. "Sarah? The old woman who gave Jenny that necklace." A flash of recognition crossed her face. Jenny was wearing it that night. The night of the fire. Adam nodded slowly. "I didn't remember that. What necklace?" Kate moved to a small writing desk in the corner and pulled out a drawer. From it, she removed a small wooden box. "Sarah gave it to Jenny on her 17th birthday. Said it was for protection." Her laugh was bitter. "Fat lot of good it did." She opened the box to reveal a silver pendant on a leather cord, a simple circle containing a 7-pointed star. "She asked me to keep it safe if anything ever happened to her," Kate continued, her voice softer now. "I never understood why it was so important to her." Adam stared at the pendant, pieces clicking into place. "The 7 points, they represent the 7 marker stones. This is part of it, Kate. Part of the binding." Kate looked at him for a long moment, then down at the pendant in her hand. "You really believe all this, don't you?" "I do," Adam said simply. "And we need your help. Today, before sunset." Another moment of silence stretched between them before Kate closed her hand around the pendant. "Tell me what I need to do." The day passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah directed their small group with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, though Adam suspected her grandmother's stories had provided most of the instruction. They gathered at noon in the parking lot of the abandoned dairy freeze. Adam, Mike, Sarah, Sheriff Paulson, a gruff man who seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings but determined to see them through, Meredith Hanson from the library, who brought a century's worth of town records documenting the strange disappearances, Emily Webb, who carried her father's medical bag, and Kate, who had barely spoken since arriving but whose presence seemed to calm Sarah. Each of you must choose an item of personal significance, Sarah instructed, her voice carrying a formal quality now. Something that connects you to life, to your humanity. The more meaning it holds, the stronger the binding will be. One by one, they revealed what they had chosen. Sarah had a beaded bracelet made by her grandmother, who had participated in the 1955 ritual. Sheriff Paulson reluctantly produced his first badge, earned 30 years earlier. Meredith offered an antique locket containing a photo of her long-deceased husband. Emily Webb brought her father's stethoscope, the tool he had used to save countless lives in Kings Hollow. Mike removed his military dog tags, turning them over in his hands before placing them in the small canvas bag Sarah provided. Adam had struggled with his choice, having few possessions that held genuine meaning. In the end, he had found it in his father's bedside table, his mother's wedding ring, which Robert Kelly had kept all these years. The last connection to Marie Kelly. All eyes turned to Kate, who slowly opened her palm to reveal Jenny's pendant. "Are you sure?" Adam asked quietly. "That's your last piece of her." Kate nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "If there's even a chance she's aware, somehow, I want her to know I'm trying to help." Sarah collected their offerings in separate cloth bags, each marked with a symbol corresponding to one of the marker stones. "We must place these at sundown, all at the same moment. Each of you will go to your assigned stone." She pointed to the map, noting who would go where. Adam would take the westernmost stone, the largest one with the most elaborate carvings. Kate would take the one directly opposite, on the eastern edge of the circle. "What about the broken stones?" Mike asked, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. The day had remained overcast, the air heavy with moisture and the peculiar electric tension that sometimes follows major storms. "Tom and I will handle the northern one," Sarah said, nodding to the sheriff. "Meredith and Emily will take the southern one. We'll need to prop them upright temporarily and secure them as best we can." They separated to gather the necessary tools: shovels, rope, wooden supports for the broken stones, agreeing to meet at their designated positions no later than 4:30, giving them time to prepare before the 5:13 sunset. As the others dispersed, Kate pulled Adam aside. "If this works," she said softly, "if the thing goes back to sleep, what happens to Jenny? To all the others it's taken?" Adam had been avoiding this question in his own mind. "I don't know," he admitted. "The research doesn't say." Kate nodded as if she'd expected this answer. "But you heard her voice. You think she's still alive down there, somehow?" "I heard something," Adam said carefully. "It might have been Jenny, or it might have been the creature mimicking her. Either way," he trailed off, unsure how to finish the thought. "Either way, we have to try," Kate finished for him. She looked toward the forest, her expression resolute. "For Jenny, for your mother, for everyone in this town." Adam nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions, determination, fear, and underneath it all, a terrible guilt that he'd escaped that night when Jenny hadn't. Whatever happened today, he owed it to her to try. At 4 o'clock, they set out for their designated positions, traveling in pairs for safety. Adam walked alone, retracing his steps from the previous day to reach the western marker stone. The forest felt different now, oppressively silent, the air thick and difficult to breathe. With each step closer to the hollow, the sensation of something massive stirring beneath the earth grew stronger. Thump thump, thump thump. The rhythm was faster now, more insistent, like a heart racing toward some climactic moment. Adam reached the western stone as the light began to fade from the overcast sky. The marker stood as before, alone in its circle of bare earth, its carvings seeming to shift and change when viewed from the corner of the eye. He checked his watch, 4:45, almost 30 minutes until sunset. Following Sarah's instructions, he began to dig a small hole at the base of the stone, just deep enough to bury his mother's ring. As he worked, the air grew colder, and a mist began to rise from the damp ground, curling around his ankles like ghostly fingers. The sensation of being watched prickled at the back of his neck, but each time he turned, there was nothing but trees and fog. At 5:05, Adam heard a sound that made his blood freeze, a distant, terrible cracking, like ice breaking on a frozen lake, but deeper, more profound. It came from the direction of the hollow at the center of the marker circle. His radio, borrowed from Sheriff Paulson, crackled to life. "Something's happening at the hollow." Mike's voice came through, tight with tension. "The mound is... Jesus, it's moving. Stay at your positions," Sarah's calm voice responded. "We must complete the ritual precisely at sunset, no matter what happens." Adam checked his watch again, 5:10. 3 minutes to go. He removed his mother's ring from its cloth bag, the small gold band catching what little light remained in the day. He thought of her face, trying to recall it clearly after so many years. Would she be down there with Jenny and all the others if the binding failed? Or was there some merciful limit to how long the dweller kept its victims alive? Another crack split the air, followed by a low, rumbling sound that Adam felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to come from the center of the earth itself. The ground beneath his feet shuddered slightly. 5:12. 1 minute. The radio crackled again, but this time it was only static, broken by what sounded like distant screaming. Adam's hand tightened around the ring as he stared at his watch, counting down the seconds. 30 seconds. 20. 10. As the moment of sunset arrived, Adam dropped the ring into the hole and quickly covered it with earth, pressing it down firmly as Sarah had instructed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath him lurched violently, nearly knocking him off his feet. The marker stone began to glow faintly, the carved symbols illuminated from within by a pale blue light. The same light, Adam realized, was emerging from the soil at his feet, spreading outward in a perfect circle around the stone. The radio burst to life with multiple voices confirming the same phenomenon at their positions. 6 stones glowing, 6 circles of light spreading outward. But they needed 7. "Eastern marker, check in," Sarah's voice demanded. "Kate, are you there?" Silence. Adam's heart raced. "Kate's not responding. Something's wrong." "The binding won't hold with only 6, Sarah said, her voice urgent. "Someone needs to get to the eastern marker now." Adam was already running, crashing through the underbrush toward the eastern edge of the circle. The forest around him seemed to warp and shift, trees bending at impossible angles as the very fabric of reality trembled with the dweller's awakening. Another massive crack split the air, followed by a sound Adam had never heard before and hoped never to hear again. A vast, wet tearing, like flesh being ripped apart, amplified 1,000-fold. The hollow, he realized with horror. The mound was rupturing. He ran faster, ignoring the branches that whipped at his face and the roots that seemed to reach up to trip him. In the distance, he could see a faint glow, the eastern marker, its stone glowing like the others, but with no circle of light spreading from its base. As he broke into the clearing, Adam saw why. Kate lay crumpled at the base of the stone, blood seeping from a wound on her temple. Standing over her was a figure Adam recognized with shock: Doc Webb. Not Emily Webb's father, who had died last winter, but the man himself, or something wearing his appearance. The entity turned as Adam burst into the clearing, its face shifting subtly, features rearranging themselves into something that was almost, but not quite, human. "You're too late," it said in a voice that was Webb's but somehow doubled, as if another voice spoke simultaneously beneath it. "The hunger awakens. The feast begins anew." In its hand was Jenny's pendant, which it had apparently taken from Kate before she could complete the ritual. Adam didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tackling the thing that looked like Webb. They crashed to the ground, the pendant flying from its grasp to land a few feet away. The creature was inhumanly strong, its fingers digging into Adam's arms with crushing force. Its face continued to shift and flow, Webb's features melting into something ancient and terrible. A face Adam recognized from his nightmares. The face of the dweller itself. "Your mother screams for you," it hissed, its breath like the stench of opened graves. "Jennifer Patterson screams for you. Soon you will join them in the belly of the hunger." Adam fought with desperate strength, managing to break free long enough to scramble toward the pendant. His fingers closed around it just as the creature grabbed his ankle, dragging him backward. "Kate!" he shouted, seeing her stir slightly. "Kate, wake up!" Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to terror as she saw the scene before her. Adam being dragged away by something that was rapidly losing its human appearance, transforming into a pallid, segmented appendage that grew directly from the earth itself. Adam threw the pendant toward her with all his strength. "Complete the ritual!" he cried as the creature pulled him relentlessly toward a widening crack in the ground. Kate lunged for the pendant, her fingers closing around it as she half crawled, half stumbled to the marker stone. The creature roared in rage, its grip on Adam tightening painfully as it sensed what was happening. With the last of his strength, Adam kicked free and rolled away just as Kate pressed the pendant into the earth at the base of the stone. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. A blinding blue light erupted from all 7 markers simultaneously, beams shooting skyward before arcing toward the center of the circle, toward the hollow. The creature shrieked, its form dissolving like smoke as the light touched it. The ground heaved and bucked beneath them like a living thing in its death throes. Trees swayed and cracked, and a terrible wailing rose from the direction of the hollow. Not a single voice but many, a chorus of the lost and taken crying out as one. Adam crawled to Kate, pulling her close as the earth continued to convulse around them. Together they watched as the 7 beams of light converged on the hollow, driving downward like spears into the heart of the earth. One final, earth-shattering roar shook the forest, and then silence fell so complete and sudden it seemed to ring in their ears like the aftermath of an explosion. Slowly, cautiously, they rose to their feet. The marker stone still glowed faintly, but the violent tremors had ceased. In the distance, they could see the others emerging from the woods, drawn toward the hollow by some shared instinct. What they found there defied explanation. Where the mound had been was now a perfectly circular pool of water, impossibly still and clear, reflecting the cloudy sky above like a mirror. Around its edges, 7 saplings had sprouted white ash trees, their young leaves unfurling in the cool evening air as if it were spring rather than late autumn. Of the dweller itself there was no sign, no monstrous form, no rupture in the earth. Only the pool, the trees, and a profound sense of absence where once there had been a malevolent presence. "It's done," Sarah said quietly, coming to stand beside them. "The binding is restored, stronger than before. The trees will grow and strengthen it further." "And what was that thing that attacked Kate?" Adam asked. "The one that looked like Doc Webb?" Sarah's expression was grim. "A servant of the hunger. There are always those who choose to serve what they fear, hoping to be spared." She looked at the others gathering around the pool. "We should check if anyone else is missing. The servants are often consumed when their master returns to sleep." Adam's gaze was fixed on the pool, its surface so still it seemed solid. "And the others? The ones it took over the years? My mother? Jenny?" Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm. "The old stories say they are released when the hunger sleeps, their spirits finally free to move on." She paused. "But some say a part of them remains in the binding, helping to keep the dweller contained." As if in answer, a breath of wind rippled across the pool's surface, and for just a moment, Adam thought he saw faces reflected there, dozens of them, including one that might have been his mother's and another that was unmistakably Jenny's. They seemed to smile up at him before the water stilled once more. "Let's go home," Kate said softly, slipping her hand into his. "It's over." But Adam knew, as did everyone who had participated in the ritual, that it wasn't truly over. The dweller slept again, bound by their sacrifices and the power of the 7 markers. But in 33 years, or perhaps sooner if the binding weakened again, it would stir once more. and King's Hollow would need new guardians to ensure it stayed asleep. Deep beneath the hollow. Epilogue. 5 years later, a small group gathered at the edge of the pool in what the townspeople now called Blackwood Sanctuary. The 7 ash trees had grown with supernatural speed, their trunks already thick, their branches forming a protective canopy over the water. Adam Kelly, now the town's unofficial historian, led a small group of teenagers around the circle of trees, pointing out the marker stones that stood sentinel among them. "This is our responsibility now," he told them solemnly. "To remember, to watch, to maintain the binding." Among the teenagers was Kate's son, born 3 years after the night of the ritual. Kate herself stood at the edge of the clearing, watching with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She and Adam had married in the spring following their confrontation with the Dweller, drawn together by shared trauma and a growing affection that had surprised them both. They had named their son Robert, after Adam's father, but sometimes, when he smiled a certain way, Adam saw Jenny in him, a genetic echo of the aunt he would never meet. Mike Derringer joined them, now wearing the uniform of King's Hollow's sheriff. Following Tom Paulson's unexplained disappearance a year after the ritual, Mike had stepped up to fill the role, determined to keep the town safe from more mundane threats. "Teaching them young, I see," he commented, coming to stand beside Adam as the teenagers wandered among the trees, touching the stones with curious hands. "They need to know," Adam replied, "so it doesn't happen again." He paused, looking out over the pool, its surface reflecting the warm summer sky. "Sarah says the binding should hold for at least a full cycle this time, with the trees growing stronger each year. But eventually it'll be someone else's problem," Mike finished. "Not for us to worry about now." But Adam knew he would always worry. In his dreams, he still sometimes heard it, distant but unmistakable, coming from deep beneath the earth. Thump thump, thump thump, the heartbeat of the hunger that sleeps, waiting patiently to wake once more. ND. The Deadlights of King's Harbor. Part 1. Return. Emma Caldwell hadn't set foot in King's Harbor in 17 years. Not since she fled the day after high school graduation. Now, as her rental car crested the final hill on Route 9, the coastal Maine town unfolded below her, nestled between dark pines and the steel-gray Atlantic. The late October sky hung low and heavy, threatening the first snow of the season. "I shouldn't have come back," she thought, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to whiten her knuckles. "Not ever." But Dr. Patricia Werner's voice echoed in her head. "Sometimes, Emma, the only way past trauma is through it." 3 years of therapy in Boston had culminated in this moment. Facing the town where her brother had disappeared, where her father had drunk himself to death, and where her mother had slowly unraveled into madness. King's Harbor, population 2,417. At least that's what the weathered welcome sign claimed as she drove past it. The beachside motel looked exactly as it had nearly 2 decades ago. The same chipped blue paint, the same flickering neon vacancy sign, the same smell of brine and mildew when she pushed open the door to room 14. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Arrived safely? Remember our strategies. This is a milestone, not a setback." Emma didn't respond. Instead, she stared out the window at the harbor. The afternoon sun was failing, light bleeding out of the day like a wound, and she could see the first pinpricks of light appearing across the water, the lighthouses on the Three Sisters Islands. She'd been avoiding looking at them since she arrived. That's where 8-year-old Bobby had vanished 25 years ago. Emma had been 10. They'd been playing hide-and-seek among the rock formations of Little Sister, the closest island to shore. A place they weren't supposed to go. A place their father had explicitly forbidden. "Your brother is dead," her father had said flatly, 3 months after the Coast Guard had called off the search. "And it's your fault." Emma's iPhone rang, jarring her back to the present. Unknown caller. She declined it and unpacked methodically. 3 days' worth of clothes, toiletries, sleeping pills, and the folder containing her mother's death certificate and the deed to the house on Barnacle Drive. All she needed to do was clean out the place and sign the papers with the realtor. Then she could leave King's Harbor forever. As she closed the blinds, movement caught her eye. a figure standing in the parking lot, looking up at her window. A man, thin and tall, wearing what appeared to be an old-fashioned fisherman's coat. When Emma blinked, he was gone. The knock at her door came just after 10 p.m. Emma had been dozing, the TV murmuring in the background. She padded to the door, checking the peephole before cracking it open, chain still in place. Emma Caldwell? The woman was in her 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face weathered but kind.
I'm Maggie Denton.
I recognized your name in the guest book. The name clicked. Mrs. Denton? You taught English at Harbor High, yes, for 42 years before retiring. She smiled thinly. May I come in for a moment? There's something you should know. Emma hesitated, then unlatched the chain. Maggie Denton stepped inside, declining Emma's offer of water or the minibar's tiny bottles. I heard about your mother's passing.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Emma said automatically. The words felt hollow. Her mother had been gone long before she died in that psychiatric facility in Portland 3 months ago. Maggie took a seat at the small table by the window. Emma, I don't want to alarm you, but several people in town have disappeared in recent months. Disappeared, like your brother did. Maggie's eyes were grave. For people since June. The authorities are calling them drowning accidents or saying the people moved away without telling anyone. But those of us who've been here a long time know better. Emma felt a chill ripple through her. I'm only here to sell my mother's house. They all had connections to what happened that summer. Jerry Benson, who led the search party for Bobby. Sarah Pullman, who used to babysit you both. Cal Turner, whose boat your father borrowed to search the islands. And last month, Deputy Tom Richards, who was first on the scene when your father reported Bobby missing. Emma's mouth went dry. That could be coincidence. Maybe. Maggie leaned forward. But there's more. People have been seeing things down by the harbor. Lights in the water, like the ones your mother used to talk about. My mother was sick, Emma snapped, instantly regretting her tone. I know what people said about Helen, but before her condition worsened, she told me things. About the night Bobby disappeared. About what she saw when your father took her to the islands to look for him. Mrs. Denton. The Wabanaki had legends about the 3 sisters. They called them the Hungry Islands. Maggie's voice dropped. They said there are things in the caves beneath them. Things that live in the dark. Things that feed on grief and guilt. Emma stood abruptly. I appreciate your concern, but I've had a long drive. Maggie nodded, rising slowly. At the door, she paused. Helen kept a journal. Did you know that? She gave it to me for safekeeping years ago when she knew they were going to commit her. She made me promise I'd return it if you ever came back. She placed a weathered leather-bound book on the table. I believe there are answers in here, Emma. About Bobby. About everything. After Maggie left, Emma stared at the journal, unable to bring herself to touch it. Finally, she slid it into her suitcase and took 2 sleeping pills with a swig of minibar bourbon. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of Bobby, his face just beneath the surface of dark water, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes reflecting impossible lights from the deep. Part 2. Shadows in the fog. Morning brought fog so thick Emma could barely see 10 feet beyond her motel window. The 3 sisters had vanished entirely behind the gray wall. Her phone showed 3 more calls from the same unknown number. No voicemails. The drive to her mother's house took less than 10 minutes. But with each turn down increasingly familiar streets, Emma felt the weight of the past pressing down. The house on Barnacle Drive was smaller than she remembered. A weathered Cape Cod with peeling white paint and dark green shutters. The lawn had gone wild, thick with brown weeds and scattered leaves. Her key still worked. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a house frozen in time. The same floral couch, the same faded curtains, the same family photos on the wall, most showing only Emma and Bobby, taken before everything fell apart. Her father had meticulously removed himself from every frame after Bobby's disappearance, as if erasing his own history. The air smelled of dust and something else. A faint medicinal scent that made Emma think of her last visit to her mother 3 weeks before she died. "He's coming back," Helen had whispered, skeletal fingers clutching Emma's wrist with surprising strength. "Bobby's coming back, and he's bringing them with him." Emma pushed the memory away and began methodically sorting through the house. Most would go to donation or the dump. By noon, she had filled 6 garbage bags when her phone rang again. Unknown caller. This time, she answered. "Hello." Static crackled through the line. Then a voice, distant, distorted. Ma." Her heart lurched. "Who is this?" "Come to the water." The voice seemed to be fighting through layers of interference. "I need you to see." "Who the hell is this?" Emma demanded, but the line went dead. Outside, the fog had grown even thicker, seeming to pulse with its own internal light. Emma grabbed her jacket and walked to the end of the driveway, peering down the street. No one was visible, but she felt eyes on her from somewhere in the murk. Back inside, she went upstairs to her old bedroom. It was exactly as she'd left it. Posters of 90s bands on the walls, shelves lined with paperbacks and swim team trophies. She sat on the bed, trying to center herself the way Dr. Werner had taught her, when her eyes fell on something she hadn't noticed before. A small puddle of water by the closet door. She approached it cautiously. The hardwood floor around it was bone dry. Only this perfect little pool glistened in the dim light. When she crouched down, she could see it wasn't still. The water was rippling, as if disturbed by something beneath the surface. Emma backed away, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. That's when she noticed the closet door wasn't fully closed. She steeled herself and pulled it open. Bobby's blue raincoat hung inside, the one he'd been wearing the day he disappeared. It was dripping wet. Emma slammed the door shut and ran downstairs, heart hammering. She hadn't seen that raincoat in the closet earlier. She was certain of it. She grabbed her purse, intending to flee back to the motel, when her mother's journal caught her eye, still in her open suitcase where she'd left it. With trembling hands, she opened it. The early entries were mundane, shopping lists, reminders of appointments, occasional reflections on Emma's college applications, or her father's increasing alcoholism. But the entries after Bobby's disappearance changed dramatically. Helen's handwriting became erratic, the pages filled with drawings of strange, angular symbols and descriptions of dreams where Bobby called to her from underwater caves. February 14th, 1999. "I saw the lights again last night. Frank says I'm imagining things, but they're there, beneath the water around little sister. Bobby is trying to show us where he is. The police won't listen. Frank won't listen. But I know my son is alive. Something down there has him." March 23rd, 1999. "Frank found me on the shore again. He was so angry. He doesn't understand that Bobby and I have a connection. I can feel him pulling at me. The lights speak to me now. They say they've been waiting for our family for generations." July 17th, 1999. "I finally understand. The Wabanaki called them Wechuj, the hollow ones. They live in the deep places, in caves beneath the islands. They need us. They've always needed us. Bobby was just the beginning. Frank knows more than he admits. I found his grandfather's journals in the attic. The Caldwells have always known about the islands, about the bargain." Emma slammed the journal shut, her hands shaking. This was madness. Her mother's descent into paranoid schizophrenia documented in painful detail. She couldn't read anymore. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm waiting at the harbor. Please come. I need to show you what your father did." Against her better judgment, Emma found herself driving toward King's Harbor Marina as the afternoon light waned. The fog remained unnaturally thick, parting only slightly to reveal the deserted parking lot. Most of the boats had been pulled for the season, leaving the slips ghostly empty. A figure stood at the end of the main pier, the same tall, thin man she'd glimpsed in the motel parking lot. As she approached, she realized he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his 70s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes the same slate gray as the ocean. "Ms. Caldwell," he nodded as if they'd met before. "Bill Hayward. I was friends with your grandfather. You've been calling me?" "Yes." His eyes were apologetic but determined. I knew your mother wouldn't have told you the truth, and your father took his secrets to the grave. What truth? Emma demanded, wrapping her arms around herself against the biting cold. About the islands, about your family's connection to them. He gestured toward the three sisters, barely visible through the fog. The Caldwells have been keepers of the secret for generations. Your father broke the cycle. He thought he could defy them. Them? Emma felt a sick sense of déjà vu, too similar to her mother's ramblings. The deep ones, the things that live beneath the islands. Hayward's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. Every 30 years they require a sacrifice, a child from the keeper's family. In exchange, they leave King's Harbor in peace. This is insane, Emma whispered. Your great-grandfather gave them his youngest daughter in 1934. His father before him sacrificed a son in 1904. But your father... Hayward shook his head. Frank refused. He hid you and Bobby during the choosing time. So they took matters into their own hands. Bobby drowned, Emma said desperately. It was an accident. I was supposed to be watching him. Bobby didn't drown. Hayward's eyes bored into hers. They took him, and now, 25 years later, they're ready for the next offering. That's why people connected to his disappearance are vanishing. They're clearing the way. For what? For you, Emma, or for your child? His eyes dropped meaningfully to her stomach. Emma's hand instinctively went to her abdomen. She wasn't showing yet, only 12 weeks along. She hadn't told anyone in King's Harbor. How did you? I told you. They're clearing the way, tying up loose ends, getting ready for the next Caldwell. Hayward's voice softened.
I'm sorry, Emma.
I truly am. But when you came back to town, you triggered something. The cycle is trying to right itself. This is crazy. Emma backed away. Stay away from me. Check the attic, Hayward called after her as she hurried back to her car. Your mother's journal mentioned your father's grandfather's writing. Find it. Then you'll understand why I'm trying to help you. Emma drove back to her mother's house in a daze, telling herself Hayward was just another local eccentric, that the stress of returning to King's Harbor was making her paranoid. But one thing nagged at her. How had he known she was pregnant? At the house, she found the pull-down attic stairs and climbed up, armed with only her phone's flashlight. The space was cluttered with dusty furniture and boxes, remnants of a family life long extinguished. In the far corner, she found an old sea chest with A. Caldwell branded into its lid. Inside were navigational charts of the waters around the Three Sisters, dozens of newspaper clippings about disappearances dating back to the 1870s, and a leather-bound journal similar to her mother's, but much older. It belonged to Arthur Caldwell, her father's grandfather. The journal confirmed everything Hayward had said. The pact with the deep ones, the 30-year cycle, the sacrifices, Arthur's clinical description of rowing his sobbing daughter Martha out to the middle island turned Emma's stomach. The final entries described how the creatures had granted prosperity to King's Harbor and Arthur's fishing fleet in particular. April 18, 1934. I hear Martha sometimes when I sail near Middle Sister. Not her voice exactly, but I feel her presence in the water. The others say this is a blessing, proof that she still exists in some form. I know better. Whatever speaks to me from those depths is not my daughter anymore. But the bargain must be kept. The deep ones have fulfilled their end. Our boats return heavy with catch while others founder. No storms have taken King's Harbor men in 30 years. The price is paid and we endure. Emma dropped the journal as if it had burned her. This couldn't be real. And yet, she remembered Bobby's fascination with the water. His insistence that he heard singing from the direction of the islands. The way he'd sleepwalked toward the shore more than once in the weeks before his disappearance. Her phone rang, startling her. Unknown caller again. Leave me alone, she answered. Emma, a child's voice, distorted by static. Emma, is that you? Her blood froze. Who is this? It's me, the voice said. It's Bobby. I need you to come to Little Sister. Tonight. At midnight. This isn't funny? Emma hissed, tears springing to her eyes. Remember the fort we built? Behind the big rock? I'm waiting there. I've been waiting for so long. The line went dead. Emma sat in the dusty attic, shaking. Couldn't be Bobby. Bobby was dead. But the voice, it was exactly as she remembered, frozen in time. And no one had known about their fort on Little Sister. No one except the two of them. Part 3. The Deep Below. Night fell like a hammer, bringing with it a fierce wind that drove the fog inland and cleared the sky. Emma stood at the kitchen window, watching the moonlight glitter on the distant water. The three sisters were clearly visible now. 3 humped shadows on the horizon, the automated lighthouse on Big Sister blinking steadily every 6 seconds. Emma knew she shouldn't go. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was madness, a cruel prank, or worse. She was experiencing the same delusions that had consumed her mother. But another part, a deeper part, wondered, what if it really is Bobby? What if he's been out there all this time, somehow? And beneath that thought lurked another, more terrible one. What if going to the island is the only way to break this cycle? To protect my baby? By 11:30 p.m., she found herself at the harbor again, this time stealing through the darkness toward the small dock where local fishermen kept their dinghies. She recognized Bill Hayward's boat immediately, the Amaranth, which had belonged to his family for generations. The old man was waiting for her. "I knew you'd come," he said simply. "I found the journal," Emma replied, "but I still don't understand. Why not just leave? Move away from King's Harbor." Hayward's face was grim in the moonlight. "Your father tried that. After Bobby disappeared, he wanted to take you and Helen far away. But Helen started sleepwalking toward the water. You had those nightmares, those episodes. How do you know about those?" Emma demanded, remembering the terrifying sleep paralysis that had plagued her teenage years. The sensation of water filling her lungs while something with too many limbs pulled her down into darkness. "Because the same thing happened to my family when they tried to leave after the 1904 sacrifice. The Deep Ones don't let the Keeper's bloodline escape. Not until the bargain is fulfilled." Hayward gestured toward his boat. "That's why I'm helping you. You need to confront this. End it. Or what? They'll take my baby next." Hayward didn't answer, which was answer enough. The crossing to Little Sister took 15 minutes, the small boat bucking against the swells. The island loomed before them, a dark mass surrounded by jagged rocks that had claimed countless ships over the centuries. Hayward maneuvered expertly to the small natural harbor on the eastern side. "I'll wait here," he said as Emma prepared to disembark. "But Emma, be careful. What speaks with your brother's voice? It may not be Bobby anymore. Then what is it? Something that's learned to wear his shape. Something that's been waiting for you to come back." His eyes were sorrowful. "The Deep Ones have ways of breaking into our minds, finding the things we most want to hear." Emma climbed onto the rocky shore, her flashlight beam dancing across the barnacle-encrusted boulders. Little Sister was only about 3 acres in size, dominated by a central hill covered in wind-stunted pines. She and Bobby had explored every inch of it as children, despite their father's prohibitions. She knew exactly where their fort was, a natural rock formation on the western side that created a small, cave-like space. They'd furnished it with salvaged buoys, a plastic milk crate, and treasures found on the beach. As she picked her way along the familiar path, Emma felt a strange doubling of time, as if she were both her adult self and her 10-year-old self simultaneously. The island seemed to pulse beneath her feet, and in the distance, she could swear she saw faint lights beneath the water, just as her mother had described. The fort was exactly as she remembered it, and huddled inside, knees drawn up to his chest, was a small figure in a blue raincoat. "Bobby," Emma whispered, her voice catching. The figure turned. In the beam of her flashlight, she saw her brother's face, exactly as it had been 25 years ago, 8 years old, freckled, gap-toothed. "You came," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "I knew you would. Bobby, how is this possible?" Emma took a step closer, her heart thundering in her chest. "They saved me," Bobby said simply, "when I fell in the water. They took me down to the deep caves. They showed me things, Emma. Beautiful things. Who are they? Bobby? Bobby's face changed subtly, something shifting behind his eyes. The hollow ones, the deep ones, they've been here forever. And they're so hungry, Emma. So hungry for so long. Emma took an involuntary step back. What do they want from me? They want to make things right. Bobby stood, and Emma noticed with horror that his feet weren't touching the ground. He hovered several inches above the rocky floor of their fort. Dad broke the cycle. He was supposed to choose, but he wouldn't, so they had to take me instead. It wasn't the proper way. Proper way. Emma's voice shook. The offering has to be willing, has to be given. Bobby's form flickered, like a television with poor reception. That's why things have gone wrong for King's Harbor. The bargain wasn't sealed correctly. The deep ones have been waiting for a new keeper of the pact. Waiting for you, Emma. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Bobby's voice changed, deepening, taking on echoes of other voices speaking in unison. You've always understood. That's why you ran away. That's why you didn't want children. You knew deep down what your bloodline carries, what it owes. Bobby, or the thing wearing Bobby's form, drifted closer to her. Do you want to see what I've become, Emma? Do you want to see what waits beneath the water? Before she could answer, Bobby's face split open like a blooming flower, revealing row upon row of glittering teeth and a pulsing, bioluminescent organ where his brain should have been. Emma screamed, stumbling backward out of the fort. She ran blindly across the rocky terrain, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind her, she heard a sound like water rushing through a narrow pipe, and beneath that, her brother's voice, still calling her name. At the island's edge, she found herself trapped, the path back to the harbor blocked by a shifting mass of darkness that might have been Bobby, might have been something else entirely. It spoke with 1,000 voices now, all of them familiar. Bobby, her father, her mother, even her own voice. The child you carry is already marked, the voices said in terrible unison. A Caldwell, part of the cycle. You cannot escape what your blood demands.
No.
Emma shouted into the wind. I'm ending this. Now. The mass surged toward her, and Emma made her choice. She dove into the freezing Atlantic, striking out toward the lights of Hayward's boat. The water around her churned and glowed with unnatural phosphorescence. Something brushed against her legs. Something with too many appendages, too cold to be alive yet moving with horrible purpose. She screamed, swallowing seawater, fighting against the currents that seemed determined to drag her down. In the depths below, she saw them, vast shapes moving in the gloom, beings with elongated limbs and bodies that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. And scattered among them, human figures with hollowed eyes, including one small boy in a blue raincoat, reaching upward with pale hands. Just as her strength began to fail, rough hands grabbed her, hauling her into Hayward's boat. She lay on the deck, retching seawater, as the old man started the engine and turned the boat toward the mainland. What did you see? He demanded. What did they show you? Emma could only shake her head, violent tremors racking her body. When she finally found her voice, she whispered, We need to go. Now, tonight. Get as far from King's Harbor as possible. Hayward's expression was grave. It won't work. I told you they don't let the Keeper's bloodline escape. Not until the bargain is fulfilled, Emma finished hollowly. Her hand went to her stomach. But I won't. I can't. Then they'll keep coming. For you. For anyone connected to you. Hayward's eyes were sorrowful. The deep ones are patient, Emma. They've waited thousands of years in the darkness. They can wait a few more months. As they approached the harbor, Emma saw that the entire waterfront was lined with silent figures. Dozens of King's Harbor residents standing perfectly still, watching the boats approach. Their eyes reflected the same eerie light she'd seen beneath the waves. They know, Hayward murmured. The whole town is part of it. Has been since the beginning. We all benefit from the bargain. We all pay the price. Emma closed her eyes, remembering the journals, her mother's decline, her father's guilt-ridden alcoholism, the cycle of violence and sacrifice that had consumed her family for generations. When she opened her eyes again, she knew what she had to do. "Take me back," she said quietly. "To the island?" Hayward looked shocked. "Yes, I need to end this. Not their way." "Mine." 3 days later, Emma Caldwell stood on the King's Harbor cliff path, looking out at the three sisters in the distance. The morning was clear, the island stark against the horizon. Behind her, her mother's house stood empty, personal items packed away, the for sale sign already posted. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Werner. "How are you feeling? Ready to come back to Boston?" Emma typed her reply carefully. "I'm staying in King's Harbor a bit longer. Some family business to finish. I'll explain everything when I see you." She placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the first fluttering movements of the life within her. After her second trip to Little Sister, a journey she could only partially remember, filled with visions and voices and a terrible bargain struck, but not the one the deep ones had expected. She'd felt a change, a shifting of the balance. The disappearances had stopped. The strange lights beneath the water had dimmed, and Bill Hayward had been found in his bed, seemingly having died peacefully in his sleep, though his face wore an expression of utmost terror. Emma turned away from the ocean view and walked back toward town. She had a doctor's appointment to make, a house to restore, a nursery to prepare. Her child would be born in King's Harbor, would grow up knowing the truth about their heritage, about the darkness beneath the waves, about the price that had been paid. Not with blood or sacrifice, but with understanding, with vigilance. The deep ones were still there, waiting in their lightless caves. Emma could feel them probing at the edges of her consciousness, seeking a way in. But she had found the true secret in her mother's journal, in the oldest entries from her ancestors. Not how to fulfill the bargain, but how to contain it. How to become not the keeper of a sacrifice, but the keeper of a prison. It would be her burden now, and someday her child's. As she walked into town, the residents of King's Harbor nodded to her respectfully, a new wariness in their eyes. They knew something had changed, that the cycle had been broken and reformed into something new. Emma caught a glimpse of her reflection in a storefront window, her face superimposed over the image of the distant islands. For just a moment, she thought she saw another face there too, Bobby's, smiling sadly, finally at peace. Then it was gone, leaving only the three sisters on the horizon, standing guard over their ancient, terrible secret. The end.